He was born without talent, a mage bound by limits. For 7 years he was nothing but a test subject, mocked, broken, forgotten. But genius doesn't die in chains. With theories no one dared believe and power stolen from the tower itself, he shatters the cage of fate. The tower that caged him will witness its strongest rebel. What happens when a man with no gift rewrites the laws of magic? Let's find out. The story begins with the Bohemian Magic Tower standing under a dark sky. Loud sighs are heard in the secret research lab. The head of the Bohemian Magic Tower, Balrog Besius, shouted for the freak to pull himself together. He's only just begun. He can't pass out. Balrog ordered the stimulant to be administered again. A loud scream echoed through the room, and blood gushed to the side. Balrog noted that the total was 461 seconds. Today, with this reagent, MC lasted a little longer. Given these results, one can say a talented experimental subject is truly a cool thing. The assistant to the head of the tower, Weller, said that 461 seconds after the 70-second stimulator of the magical power circuit. Can we already assume that the magic circle has been activated and the immunization reaction suppressed? Balrog, crossing his arms behind his back, noted that this was a good result. They also administered a stimulant that expands memory. In this magical tower, known as the most powerful in the Empire, the protagonist is slowly dying. The main character, Verdun, wondered why someone like him, whose gifted mind was recognized, was here. Balrog ordered the stimulator to be forcibly activated. The protagonist's eyes widened in pain, and he coughed up blood. He screamed in horror and asked for it to stop. MC pulled hard on the chains with his hands and yelled that he begged them to stop. Balrog snorted in displeasure and noted that the protagonist was very noisy. He ordered a report on the completion of the experiment. Weller turned his head to the side and replied that he understood the tower's leader. The protagonist, with his tortured body, wondered why he was dying in the magical tower he dreamed of entering. Weller grabbed him by the hair and ordered him to get ready. He smiled haughtily and asked how Verdun was feeling. The protagonist is a bad mage, but MC managed to get arrogant because people praised his intelligence a little. That's why MC's life force and knowledge are now being extracted in a secret research lab. Weller asked Verdun to do something clever as usual. The protagonist must prove himself. Well, it seems that in his current state, the protagonist can't even lose consciousness. MC started to lose consciousness, and Weller yelled in irritation. Can Verdun hear him? Weller turned his head to the side in anger and shouted, "What is MC looking at?" He noticed an ant and noticed that the experimental ants had escaped. Weller ordered this to be fixed and barked. Can't they even handle this? His comrades apologized to him. Weller angrily called them damned freaks. He calmly exhaled and said that if you think about it, the protagonist is practically an insect. MC doesn't have an ounce of magical power, not even enough to break his chains, so no one caught him. It's better for them, after all. Thanks to Verdun, they now have an S-rank experimental subject. A friend, with whom the protagonist entered the magic tower, received sponsorship to study abroad. Weller remarked that he sympathized with Ravelin for having such a friend. The friend laughed and agreed with him. The protagonist wondered, for what reason? All this is happening now because MC is weak. Weller asked with a smile, what was Verdun saying? The protagonist, with a crazy look, ordered them to shut up. It all started 15 years ago. MC had no parents. He grew up in an orphanage. His dream was to become an amazing mage. In the end, Verdun came to the magic tower to study magic. But no matter how hard the protagonist tried, he could not become a mage. It was due to the development restriction of rank 1. At the age of 7, he passed the magic compatibility test. The results showed that he would not become a mage. MC has no talent. This was a fatal blow for him, but the protagonist did not give up. Becoming a mage is his dream. Therefore, Verdun secretly took books left in the rooms while cleaning. He also memorized many books from the library of the magic tower. Although he did not have magical power, the protagonist did not doubt his own sanity. Several years passed like this. MC finally became a research assistant at the magic tower. It was then that he realized the truth he did not know. His mind is not just talent, it is from the world of genius. Lucard is the only research assistant close to him, and he recognized the protagonist. Perhaps he will have a chance to stay in the tower, not as a servant, but as a scientist. This is what MC thought then, until Lucard made his work public, passing it off as his own. Verdun learned of this too late and immediately went to the head of the tower. The respected head of the Bohemian Magic Tower, Balrog, did not let this go. Balrog, looking sternly at the sheet, clarified, does the protagonist mean to say that MC is the author of the multi-dimensional continuity theory? Verdun, smiling, exclaimed that it was so. If the tower leader allows, he will explain everything from the beginning. Balrog interrupted him and remarked that this was amazing. He hadn't even known such talent existed among ordinary researchers. With a mad smile radiating ominous energy from his body, he ordered MC to come to his lab in 2 days when the moon had set. If Verdun had escaped from the tower, would he have been able to live normally for the next 7 years? That's how he was forcibly imprisoned in the tower leader's lab. The protagonist became a daytime worker and a nighttime subject for experiments. MC said that they would try to create a magic circle on him to confirm the theory, that they would inject medicines into his veins and observe the reaction, that they would test the effectiveness of new potions, and that his life would be dedicated to the magic tower. No one believed it when Verdun tried to reveal the truth. In response, the tower's leader threatened to kill those dear to the protagonist. MC, with wounds on his body, lying in the room, thought that it was all over. What could he do? Verdun had fallen into the past. The protagonist's friend, Rovelin, ran quickly and asked MC to hurry. The mage ordered the worker to hurry. The protagonist, holding a box in his hands, exclaimed that he understood everything. MC wondered if this was his childhood. Rovelin, sitting on the grass, suggested that Verdun become great mages together. She raised her finger and asked him to promise. He crossed his fingers with hers and promised. MC wondered if his development potential had been a little higher. Would everything have turned out differently? He came out of his memories and mentally asked himself to accept that it was all over. Tears instantly streamed down his cheeks. Verdun sat on the floor and looked at the multitude of ants. He closed his eyes and thought that it was that sound again. The protagonist hears it every time during experiments. He doesn't know if he has any strength left. Maybe it's easier to die. The dead ant clarified, but that's not what MC wants, is it? It's still very early. Nothing is over yet. For the sake of revenge and survival, Verdun must hold on, grit his teeth, and endure. Then, the protagonist will be reborn. MC will no longer be trampled. Verdun will gain great power and surpass his own capabilities. The protagonist clenched his fists and thought that nothing is over. He must sharpen the blade for revenge. Over the past 7 years, with everything he has, until it is sharpened, MC will not break and will solve this one and only problem. In the face of great power, it is not enough to simply be smarter than others. If this is the case, he must challenge fate. He will disregard the boundaries of theory and complete the creation of a method for restructuring the body, the theory of resisting the heavens. Tomorrow, Verdun will surpass his own capabilities. The long-awaited theory of opposing the heavens, which would allow him to reconstruct his body, was completed the moment he accepted death. Now, all that remained was to prove it. This artifact could allow the protagonist, someone who lacks any magic at all, to use magic once. It will develop in the process. Tomorrow evening, MC will regain his freedom. A long night passed, and finally the day came when Verdun would implement the plan. Weller opened the door for the protagonist and said it was time to clean the lab. He looked at MC with irritation and ordered him not to stand still. Verdun must wipe away the blood and heal the cuts. Did the protagonist really cry after their little experiment? The festival was starting soon, so the protagonist shouldn't even think about leaving. Did the protagonist hear him? Weller ordered MC to answer. Verdun calmly agreed. After some time, the protagonist was cleaning the lab. Rovelin asked if he was cleaning alone. The protagonist asked why she was here. Rovelin replied that she had come to say goodbye to a friend before leaving. MC smiled and said that she had told him she would now be studying abroad in the magical city of Verent. Such a special privilege was granted only to the most distinguished talents of the magic tower. Verdun congratulated her and remarked that he hoped everything would go well. Rovelin looked at him sternly. She raised her hand and clarified that her offer still stood. Rovelin offered to go with her to Verent. There, the protagonist would not have to deal with ignorant fools who despised him. MC would be able to find new opportunities to study magic. Rovelin turned her head awkwardly to the side and asked him not to misunderstand her. She simply wanted to talk to someone, that's all. Verdun interrupted her and replied that he would stay here. Rovelin sadly said that she would write him letters. After some time, the carriage stopped in front of the tower. The protagonist, looking out the window at the carriage, thought that she knew nothing. She didn't know what had been happening here. She didn't know what he had been subjected to all this time. And yet, he was grateful to her for one thing. Rovelin didn't interfere with his plan. The Magic Festival is one of the most famous holidays in the world. It is dedicated to the construction of the first magic tower. It celebrates the revival of magic. This is the busiest day in the tower. When the festival begins, all the high-ranking mages leave for the big cities. Only the low-ranking ones remain locally. The protagonist banged his fist on the door and said it was him. The manager of the jewelry vault, sitting on a chair, asked what brought MC at this hour. Verdun replied that the head of the tower asked him to clean the jewelry vault. The manager snorted in irritation and said that he should have asked permission in advance. The damned bastard didn't think of that. He raised the cup to his mouth and, pointing his finger at the door, asked the protagonist to go, but let MC try to scratch or lose anything. Verdun replied that he understood the manager. He calmly opened the door and looked away. The protagonist closed the door and placed his hand on the magic ball. MC thought he had activated the sound-blocking artifact. Now it would all begin. He was going down the stairs. Verdun went down and looked at the magic seal. The second circle is an ancient artifact, which the tower leader spent a huge amount of money to create. It allows the mage to use 3 spells and temporarily awakens the hidden talents of its owner. Verdun thought that to carry out his plan, he would need this staff. To take it, it was necessary to deactivate the protective magic circle. This is a 7th level spell. The tower leader cast it personally. MC had spent the last 7 years studying how to remove it. The magic circle, which the tower leader was so proud of. Verdun decisively directed a stream of mana towards the staff and yelled that he would destroy it with his own powers. At the same time, alcohol was on the table. The mage, sitting at the table, noted that everyone was enjoying the festival, and they were forced to guard the source of power. A comrade clarified that the mage had drawn straws. The mage sternly said that this was why he was putting up with it. If it were a matter of skill, he would definitely have been chosen. He looked at the door with a flushed face and asked, "Is that Verdun?" The mage noted that this was very timely and ordered more drinks to be brought. The mage clarified that when he became the head of the tower, he would no longer drink cheap alcohol. A comrade clarified, "Did the mage think that the head's position was easy to take? If the mage became the head, he would provide the drinks." The mage joyfully exclaimed that he would remember, and he would definitely become the head. A stream of mana quickly flew between the comrades, and the guard looked at the mage in fear. The guard yelled with fury, "What is the protagonist doing?" MC sternly pointed his staff towards the enemy. The guard shouted, "Has Verdun really gone crazy?" The protagonist noted with fury that he hadn't expected such a reaction. The guard raised his staff and yelled, "How dare MC try to harm a mage? If the protagonist survives this spell." The guard used third-tier magic, Tsunami. Verdun used third-tier magic, Earth Spear. The Earth Spears swiftly headed towards the enemy. The guard looked at them with great fear. Blood gushed onto the floor and screams echoed throughout the room. The guard, sitting on the floor with a spear in his chest, noted that MC was only rank 1. How was the protagonist able to use magic? Verdun clarified, "Is the guard surprised that an experiment subject is capable of such a thing? This is what happens when a mage gets too carried away with people." Both the guard and the tower's leader. The protagonist looked up, standing between the corpses. He thought that this was the first time he had ever looked so closely at the source of the magic tower's power. It had taken 7 years to reach this point. Now, using mana from the source, the protagonist would begin his confrontation with the heavens. If he fails, he doesn't know what will become of him. However, if MC doesn't try, he won't know for sure. Magic seals covered his body, and Verdun struck the floor with his staff. A huge seal appeared under the protagonist's feet. He decisively used body reformation. MC furiously raised his hand to the staff and used Heaven's Defeat. A stream of mana hit the source of power, and a bright stream of energy covered the magic tower. At the same time, a carriage was driving along the mountain. Balrog, sitting in it, noticed that it was a very huge energy surge from the source. This means someone got into his magic tower. After a while, smoke enveloped the rubble of the buildings. The protagonist coughed as he crawled out from under the rubble. The staff in his hand instantly broke. MC thought that the force was so destructive that it swept away an entire building. If he remained alive, then everything worked. Verdun quickly raised his head and looked at the flash in the sky. Numerous magic seals appeared among the trees. The protagonist thought someone was approaching. A Balrog jumped out of the magic seal. The protagonist wondered, could it really be the head of the magic tower? Balrog sensed that something had happened to his people. The head raised his hand in anger, intending to attack. A powerful explosion thundered and smoke enveloped the space. After a while, the smoke cleared and Balrog looked down in irritation. He turned his attention to the ground and yelled, "Is this a teleportation magic circle? How dare the enemy touch the magic tower? It doesn't matter who it was. Even if it's the Emperor or a small child, he will find and kill him." Lightning struck from the dark cloud and the head asked to wait for this. After some time, under the bright sky, MC thought he wanted to sleep. He couldn't even move. He wanted to stay like this longer. Could that really be the sound of water? Verdun yelled, "What is that? Where is he?" He needed to run. The protagonist, kneeling in front of the river, looked into the water. He was amazed to see himself in the reflection and asked, "What happened?" MC wondered, had his appearance changed? Verdun put his hand to his face and asked, "Why did he look like that?" His brown hair had become ashen. His black pupils had become lighter, and his eyes were now pure blue. The protagonist felt his body with his hands and asked, "Did something happen during the body reconstruction?" He thought it seemed to have worked. MC dealt with those people from the magic tower. He overcame the confrontation with the heavens, and before the tower's leader could find him, he quickly disappeared using teleportation magic. As a result, Verdun ended up here. He had never seen such a forest. There were no such plants in the Bohemian magic tower. This meant that he had teleported halfway across the continent. In other words, he managed to transform his own body and escape in time through a pre-prepared magic circle. The protagonist laughed joyfully and exclaimed that he was free. He lay down on the ground and asked, "I wonder how the tower's leader is feeling now?" MC was sure Balrog was furious. Verdun thought that since the tower was destroyed, they would have to find the culprit and learn that their lab animal had escaped. But this wasn't enough to finish off the magic tower. Even though they had lost employees, the protagonist was sure the leader would take countermeasures. Besides, Balrog wasn't called the Almighty Man for nothing. But for now, this would suffice. The tower would be rebuilt, and in the meantime, he would grow stronger for the sake of revenge. Verdun would destroy everything the leader built before his eyes, and his name would be preserved in history. To take revenge and realize himself as a mage, these were his goals. The protagonist raised his fist in happiness. He thought that he believed it was time to say goodbye to the magic tower. After some time in the forest, the goblin struck the chest with an axe. MC raised his hand and used the wind cutter. The goblin turned his head to the side, noticing a gust of wind. Verdun glared at the gushing blood. He looked at his hand and noticed that he didn't feel any difference. It seemed there was a problem during the body's reconstruction. The protagonist thought that, except for the color of the eyes and hair, his appearance was mostly unchanged. Even the amount of mana was the same. For now, he had no way of finding out what happened. MC kicked the monster's head and said that things were bad. Since there were goblins walking around, the village must be far away. He stopped and noticed the chest. Verdun knelt down and thought that these were cart tracks. Someone was in a hurry and dropped the things. The protagonist closed his eyes and used mana detection. He thought he needed to find the owner of the box. A stream of mana directed along the ground and a loud squeal came from the cart. At the same time, Conrad ordered the horse to go faster. He screamed in great fear. What was that? Conrad wondered. How did he get into this? He figured that the fact that they'd run into the remnants of the bandits, whose numbers had apparently been recently decimated, wasn't a problem. His inability to negotiate and talk of having connections with Baron Pyth, as well as the fact that all his mercenaries had fled in fear, weren't a problem either. But what was that creepy smile on that orc's face? Thank God, the orc was busy attacking those bandits. If it weren't for them, he would have died already. A loud scream came from the forest, and Conrad yelled, "Are they really chasing him?" He lashed out with his whip at the horse and ordered it to go faster. The cartwheel hit a tree lying on the ground. Conrad screamed and fell to the ground. He sat up and noticed that his back hurt. Conrad was stupefied and asked for a minute. He looked in horror at the many eyes among the trees. Orcs and goblins looked at him. Conrad shook with terror and said that he couldn't believe that monsters would actually kill him. The orcs quickly ran towards him and raised their weapons with the intention of attacking. Conrad closed his eyes and thought that he was finished. An earthen wall instantly surrounded him. The protagonist noticed that he forgot to leave an opening for Conrad to breathe. The orc turned his head to the side with a sly smile. Verdun confidently clarified that he thought he could handle it until Conrad suffocated. This was his first real fight if you don't count that goblin. The orc growled with a mad smile. The protagonist raised his hand and said that this was a good opportunity to test his abilities. He aimed multi-fire arrows at the monsters. An orc with a terrifying smile stood among the goblins engulfed in flames. He raised his hand and screamed, and the orcs quickly ran into battle. MC raised his hands and, creating magic seals, used multi-fire arrows in a whirlwind. He used a double spell, a fire wave of arrows. A powerful fiery explosion thundered. After some time, the corpses of the monsters lay on the ground. Verdun looked up and thought that he was surprised. Before, he wouldn't have been able to kill even a single goblin, but now, it seems, there are no survivors left. Conrad must be freed before he dies. Otherwise, the protagonist would have come all this way for nothing. The orc with a terrifying look extended his hand towards MC. He growled, and Verdun turned his head to the side. The protagonist wondered if there was really one more alive. A pool of blood formed on the ground. Sometime later, Conrad was sitting in a cart. He introduced himself with a joyful smile and exclaimed that he would definitely never forget today. If it weren't for the protagonist, he wouldn't have gotten out alive. How could he repay him for that? MC tensely asked him to just watch the road. Otherwise, the carriage would flip over again. Conrad happily agreed with him. Conrad noticed that he almost forgot to ask. Did that horde of monsters pose a danger or at least a threat to the protagonist? He apologized if the question was stupid. Verdun closed his eyes in irritation and thought that Conrad was talking too much. It was a little dangerous. Some time ago, the protagonist created a mana vortex in his hand. He attacked the orc with a wind cutter. Currently, MC threw his head back with a smile and replied that there was nothing to worry about. He asked for a short answer and asked if they often appeared in this area. Verdun had heard that thieves usually avoided places where monsters lived. Conrad disagreed and said he'd never encountered them before. This forest is controlled by Baron Pyth. They'd often exchanged letters as children. Conrad was told that the thieves in this territory had been exterminated, so he took his usual route without taking his expensive mercenaries. But it seemed his luck had run out today. The protagonist thought the teleportation had failed. But apparently he'd been transported to the right place since he was on Baron Pyth's land. Even if MC had erased all traces and changed his appearance, the magical Tower of Bohemern might be looking for him. For now, he needs to hide his identity and become stronger. Conrad turned his head to the side and clarified, "The protagonist is listening, right?" MC noted that he didn't seem to have introduced himself. Verdun thought that the time when he would use his own name would come when he met the tower's leader. The protagonist said his name was Asher. After some time, they arrived at Baron Pythe's estate. Lord of the Pyth lands, Pythe Henrod, asked in amazement what had happened to him. He must have lost a little weight. Conrad smiled, scratched his head, and replied that he seemed to have lost weight while running from the orcs. Pyth ran up to him, apologized, and asked if Conrad was okay. Conrad had been attacked not only by thieves but also by monsters. Conrad asked him not to worry and exclaimed that Pyth was not to blame. Pyth smiled and asked if this was the mage who had helped his comrade. He wouldn't stand idly by, since his friend's savior was right in front of him. The Baron asked Conrad to tell MC to go to the estate. After a while, Verdun put his hand to his chest and thanked him for the clothes, food, and shelter he had provided. Pyth smiled and clarified that he hadn't introduced himself yet. The Baron stated his name and said that he was the manager of these lands. He asked the protagonist to sit down. "Does he like this food?" The protagonist agreed and remarked that it was very good. Pyth folded his arms and said that for saving Conrad, he had prepared 5 million elks for MC. The Baron asked Asher to say when to give it to the protagonist. It might seem like he was in a hurry, but if MC didn't mind, Peeth would hire Asher for the job. The pay would be decent. Verdun put the fork on the table and thought that money was needed to achieve his goal. He would also be able to practice his magical abilities in combat. The protagonist inquired about the job. Peeth explained that a few days ago they had found hanged bodies in the southern forest. An investigation revealed that they were all residents of a nearby farming town. They found that town in ruins. At first, they weren't sure who the culprit was, but later learned that it was bandits who had done the work. However, after searching the entire area, nothing was found, as if all traces of them had been erased by magic. The protagonist suggested that perhaps there was a mage among them. Pyth agreed and said that everything was suspicious. MC asked when they planned to start the pursuit. Pyth smiled slyly and replied that in 4 days. Sometime later, at the castle gates, Baron Pyth's knight and the person in charge of this task, Enoch, bowed and introduced himself. He said that the dark-haired one was Harris and the young one was Peric. The worker raised his hand with a smile and exclaimed that he was glad to meet the magician. The protagonist shook Enoch's hand and introduced himself. MC remembered Pyth with irritation and thought that he had hoped this would be a good chance, but he didn't expect to have to pursue bandits. He would consider this payback for him and the Baron for staying here. MC turned his head to the side and asked, "Were they with them too?" Enoch noted that they were adventurers. It seems they gathered because they heard rumors about the recently appeared orcs. The pay for the kill is high. Even gold-ranked adventurers are here. Gold-ranked adventurers are on the same level as ordinary knights. In other words, they are seasoned veterans who can use energy to strengthen themselves and their weapons. Rumor has it that at this rank, they are capable of killing monsters. If they needed Verdun, despite having 3 knights. Enoch asked Asher to let him know if there really was a mage among the bandits. The protagonist agreed and asked why they needed him. Enoch smiled and replied that usually second-ranked mages are as strong as knights, but they would have a hard time if they used spells from a distance. It would be best, of course, if they didn't have to deal with a mage. MC noted that they were unlucky. Enoch tensed up greatly upon hearing this. Verdun stood confidently in front of the people. He quickly raised his hand and said that there was a magic circle in front of them. The protagonist instantly cast Dispel. A huge red magic circle appeared in front of them. The knight screamed, "What is that?" A magic circle suddenly appeared. How could something like this be on their territory? MC remarked that it looked like the spell he had just removed was camouflage. He ordered them to stand there and clarified that he would go and remove the rest. Verdun raised his hand and a powerful gust of wind blew to the side. Enoch was surprised and thought, Asher could destroy a magic circle so easily. Who the hell is the protagonist? Explorers belong to a guild that accepts orders from all over the continent. They do this by exploring unknown territories or scaring away monsters that plague people. Death always follows adventurers, but despite this, people admire them because with their abilities come wealth and fame. However, when an adventurer becomes too powerful, having experienced numerous situations where he found himself on the brink of death, consumed by desires, and having abandoned honor, he loses control and points his blade at other people. Ultimately, he becomes a simple bandit. After a while, the bandit, Varja, screamed furiously that it was a curse. The damage from Pythi's attack hadn't been compensated, and now they were suddenly attacked by orcs and goblins, not to mention the fact that they were running low on provisions. He raised his hand and yelled, "What are they doing?" Varja ordered them to stop just watching and go hunt. At the same time, Harris remarked that he thought it was them. What will they do? They are waiting for Enoch's orders. The knight quietly said that the opponents have let down their guard, so they will attack right now. The protagonist placed his hand on Enoch's sword and asked for their mercy. MC clarified that he was accompanying them as the one who must fight against magic, but they hadn't yet assessed the enemy's strength. If their mage had more circles than MC, they could lose. Enoch noted that if the opponents left, Verdun turned his head to the side and, interrupting him, said there was an option. Varja clarified that after all the effort he'd put into expanding his territory, the subordinates hired from his previous village had also been killed. Varja's subordinate, Bilsian, asked him to stop swearing. He suggested they think about what to do. Who could have imagined that an orc laughing like a clown would come and kill all their subordinates? Varja replied sadly that when he worked as a researcher, he never imagined something like this would happen. If only he hadn't been caught murdering another researcher for money. Varja grinned maliciously and asked if they might attack another village. Bilsian disagreed, saying the Baron was angered by the men hanging from the trees. They were hiding thanks to concealment magic, but it was time to hit the road. They said there was a city called Martes nearby. They'll plunder the neighboring villages. Fiery beams of mana flew past Bilsian, interrupting him. A powerful explosion immediately thundered. Bilsian created magical seals and yelled, "Was that a sudden explosion? It's not just an explosion, it's magical. They've been discovered." The knights leaped decisively toward their opponents. They shattered the magical shield. Bilsian threw his head back and blood gushed from his mouth. Varja looked at his comrade in fear and called out to him. Verdun said that the mana barrier is a defensive ability that's quick to cast, but it's easy to destroy because it's not very durable. Destroying the barrier sends a blow back to the caster. Varja looked at MC in amazement and thought that this man was a mage. Verdun smiled and added that their power was now clear. He would deal with the mage, as they agreed. Enoch, kneeling, said that he was counting on Lord Asher. Varja asked angrily, did the Baron send people to kill them this time? Pyth hired the mage and the others, but his plan would fail. Enoch instantly crossed blades with the bandit. Varja yelled that he had sent the Baron heads back. Enoch smirked and mockingly said that the enemy had scared him. He asked Varja to try if the bandit could. After a while, Bilsian thought irritably that he had planned to escape, but the protagonist was pursuing him. Luckily, MC uses an earthen wall for this. Only those with 3 or more circles can fly, and the protagonist has 2 circles. Bilsian yelled, how long is MC going to stand there? He thought he would strike first and aimed multi-ice arrows at Verdun. Bilsian thought that if the protagonist only had 2 circles, he would kill him before he could get away. The protagonist raised his hand and fired multi-fire arrows from it. They instantly hit each other, and there was an explosion. The smoke cleared, and a huge dent appeared in the ground. Bilsian smiled and remarked that this was not bad for a man with 2 circles, but the protagonist had chosen the wrong opponent. If MC had come with a knight, his position would have been disadvantageous, but with the protagonist alone, he could handle him and escape. Verdun confidently noted that he did not plan to let the opponent go. Bilsian clarified that MC had strong confidence and the ability to use complex attribute magic at such a young age. He hadn't seen such promising talent in a long time. Bilsian, with a mad smile, exclaimed that the protagonist probably didn't think this would be his end. Bilsian used 3rd circle magic, falling ice. The ice block approached the protagonist's head and Bilsian commanded him to die. The ice block instantly stopped. Bilsian was stunned by the scene. Stone arrows stopped the ice block. Bilsian wondered if the enemy had blocked the spell. The protagonist raised his hand and created earthen spears. He instantly clenched his hand into a fist. The ice block shattered. Bilsian yelled in confusion. How could a mage with 2 circles use a 3rd circle spell? MC raised his hand and asked the enemy to guess. Bilsian wondered if the enemy had not only used a 3rd circle spell, but also possessed 4 attributes. Had the protagonist been deceiving him from the start? Verdun aimed his hand at the enemy, and a stone block pierced Bilsian's chest. The enemy fell to the ground surrounded by blood. The protagonist remarked that it was good that he had come. Now he knew how to fight against a mage. At the same time, the orc heard sounds. He grinned madly, holding a human corpse in his hand. 2 days before the expedition, Verdun created an experimental medicine using ingredients brought from the magic tower. He nicknamed it the Magic Circuit Extender. Remembering the hellish days spent in the magic tower, MC no longer has the desire to experiment on people again. But thanks to him, the protagonist was able to obtain the 3rd circle. MC looked at the enemy and said that he seemed to have died. He needed to bring proof of victory over the bandits so that they would believe him, and Verdun would earn their trust. The protagonist wondered, is this the enemy's staff? He picked up the staff and used appraisal. It is a magical stone wand with a spell cast on it. It reduces the casting time of spells and increases the effectiveness of those related to ice. This could be useful for MC. Perrick ran quickly and yelled, Ash is okay, right? When they dealt with all the bandits, he began to worry about the protagonist. MC bowed and, asking for forgiveness, noted that the enemy was stronger than he thought. The protagonist had to try hard. Perrick turned his head to the side and said that judging by the devastation around him, he assumed the fight had been difficult. Verdun was surprised and asked, have they dealt with the bandits? Perrick smiled, shoved the mage's corpse into a sack, and replied that although their leader remained to be taken care of, Enoch was busy with that right now. The night should be done by the time they arrive. The protagonist asked if he could ask a question. Perrick happily agreed. MC sternly raised his wand and asked what was supposed to be done with the bandits' belongings. Perrick gave a thumbs up and replied that their lord allowed them to take whatever they liked, unless the Baron needed it. Verdun smiled and thought that this wand would come in very handy. After a while, Enoch exclaimed that Asher had done a good job. If it weren't for the protagonist, they would have had more problems. MC disagreed and replied that it had been a good experience for him. Varja looked at the bag in horror and wondered if Bilsian had really been killed. If this continued, they would be taken to the Lord and executed. He couldn't die in the village like this. He still wanted to see so much. He had no choice. He had to run. Enoch and the protagonist noticed the noise. Varja swung his sword and killed the knights. He raised his weapon in anger and ordered them to get out of the way. Varja thought that he couldn't deal with them without Bilsian's magic. That meant there was only one way out. He would kill the knight, steal his horse, and escape. Varja swiftly attacked Enoch. He smiled slyly and raised his dagger. Enoch instantly grabbed his arm. He grabbed the enemy's clothes with his hand. Varja wondered, what is this? The knight threw his sword aside. Enoch quickly threw the enemy over himself. He ordered the knights to tie the enemy up, so that the bandit wouldn't move. Varja roared in rage. How dare the knight throw away his sword? Where is the enemy's knightly pride? Enoch pulled out a dagger and laughed, asking what he was talking about. He raised the weapon over Varja's face and said that pride is a pastime for the living. Enoch struck, and blood spread across the ground. He apologized for this unpleasant scene. If he had more time, Enoch would have cut off the bandit's head. He doesn't usually fight like this. The protagonist smiled and remarked that this was surprising. MC looked at the bandits and asked why the knight left them alive. Enoch replied that he heard that there were familiar faces among them. Perhaps some were survivors of the attack on the farming town. They planned to bring them to the estate and find out who they are before deciding their fate. Harris raised his hand and ordered them to prepare to return to the estate. He asked to lead the bandits after him. The knight lifted the bandit and ordered him to get up. The bandit ran in great fear and screamed that he didn't want to die like this. The knight ordered him to stop. Harris went after the bandit and said that he would deal with him. The protagonist asked to wait a minute and noticed that something was wrong. Suddenly, the bandit screamed and asked for help. Harris smelled something and asked, "Is that the smell of blood?" The bandit's head flew quickly from the forest. Harris covered his face with his sword. The bandit's head fell to the ground. The knights grabbed their weapons in fear and screamed, "What is that? Are there really orcs there?" Verdun grinned and wondered if he could be called an orc. Enoch noted that the adventurers had been unable to defeat him. The protagonist thought that, moreover, the orc was not alone. He sensed a dozen of their kind. The orc was probably the leader of these freaks. He looked like the one from last time. The corners of his mouth were long, making it seem like the orc was smiling, and his height is astonishing, towering over other members of his species. He must be an advanced orc. The orc leader quickly raised his hand, and the monsters rushed into battle. Enoch ordered everyone to take defensive positions. "First, we need to concentrate on the goblins. They'll worry about the orcs later." The orcs swiftly attacked the knight. Enoch raised his hand tensely and flew to the side. The orc, smiling madly, raised his leg above the knight. Perrick instantly struck the monster's leg. The orc began to fall with force. Enoch plunged his sword into the orc's chest. It slid down, leaving a huge wound on his body. The orc fell, and Enoch landed on the ground. The orc, smiling, was breathing heavily. He clutched the goblin in his hand and instantly killed it. The orc spat a bone from his mouth. He sat up and wiped the blood from his mouth with his hand. Enoch laughed and clarified. The orc healed himself by eating his kinsman. It looks like they won't be returning home peacefully. He ordered them to prepare for battle. The orc, smiling, raised his weapon. He quickly threw it towards the knights. Harris fell into a stupor. Looking at the approaching weapon, he instantly stopped the enemy's weapon with his sword and wondered why the orc had suddenly thrown it. The sword began to break, and Harris's thoughts were interrupted. He looked at the shattered weapon with intense horror. Harris thought they were fragments of a broken sword. They instantly pierced Harris's body. Perrick called out to his comrade in horror. Enoch warned Perrick to be careful. The orc approached him, and Perrick wondered when the enemy had time, he would simply cut off his arm. Perrick asked in confusion, "What is this?" He wondered if the sword was really stuck in his muscles. Perrick looked at the enemy's arm in fear and yelled that he couldn't draw his sword. Earthen spears struck the orc. The protagonist, enveloping his body in mana, ordered Perrick to come here. Perrick quickly slid toward MC and exclaimed that he was safe. He sadly asked, "What should we do?" Perrick couldn't get the sword back. Verdun clarified that he thought the orc's recovery speed and physical endurance increased after the enemy ate the goblin. Perrick gritted his teeth and said he'd struck with full force to try and cut off the orc's arm. He'd never heard of orcs being so strong. Perhaps an orc is a special entity from legend? The protagonist disagreed, and Perrick clarified in surprise, despite such strength, MC thought it was restoration and strengthening through absorption, control of those beneath him, and inducing madness, power comparable to a knight's. The enemy was clearly different from an unusual orc, but if that's all, the orc was too weak to be called a special entity. Ordinary spells have a limit. Even if you invest more magic, the affected area will not expand beyond a fixed point, and if the limit is exceeded, the magic will fade. That's the law of magic. However, there is a spell without a limit. Verdun created a magical seal between his hands and used earth control. A powerful gust of wind threw the knights aside. The knights screamed in fear that the earth was shaking. First the monsters, now an earthquake? The knight was wrong. They would all die here. Enoch ordered them to remain calm and not leave their positions. He clarified that this was Asher magic. Enoch looked at the shaking ground and clarified that he had said so, but was it possible to remain calm in such a situation? The goblins and orcs remained below, and the knights rose up on a small lump of earth. The goblin looked in fear at his falling kinsman. The orc, smiling, fell to the ground and left a dent in it. The protagonist raised his hand and cast a third circle spell, Flame Ball. Fire engulfed the goblins and orcs. Enoch, kneeling next to Harris, asked Perrick to remain calm. Perrick shouted with great joy that it was so nice to watch them burn. The third circle spell, Flame Ball, has no limit to its expansion. However, there are no mages who use it as their main spell, since it requires an astonishing expenditure of mana, which is not worth it considering the result. MC clutched his neck, tired, and thought that if he had enough mana, his power would be greater than that of the third circle. But that was beyond his capabilities. A loud roar echoed around him, and the knights tensed up. The protagonist screamed, "Is the orc still alive?" The orc, shrouded in lightning, was devouring goblins. Perrick, frightened, grabbed the protagonist by the cloak and screamed, "What now?" Verdun thought that since the orc didn't want to burn, he'd better freeze to death. He used a wave, and the water covered the monster's bodies. The protagonist jumped down, and Perrick looked at him and called out, "Asher." MC used multi-ice arrows, Winter Hurricane. Verdun used a double spell, arrows of intense cold, and an ice arrow instantly pierced the orc's body. The goblins froze in rage in blocks of ice. The orc extended his hand toward the protagonist with a mad smile. MC thought that even if the orc could regenerate infinitely indefinitely or feel no pain, the enemy wouldn't be able to move in a frozen state. Verdun aimed an ice sphere at the enemy. The orc froze, and the protagonist declared the capture complete. Sometime later, in the magical city of Varent, a young man sitting at a table asked if the old man had read the news. The old man agreed, and the young man, looking at the newspaper in surprise, asked if the magic tower had really closed. Now he had seen everything. They said the tower's energy source exploded. The old man arrogantly raised his cup to his mouth and asked if the young man believed it. Most of the mages died, and the tower's operation ceased. The extent of the damage is too great for the source explosion to be the sole cause of the mage's death. People say it's divine punishment, or that someone orchestrated the explosion. The mage, passing by the old man, said it was good that they had managed to prove the theory they were researching. I wonder if letters came from the tower while they were in practice. The old man exclaimed that someone must have planned to seal the magical tower of Bohemern, because they wouldn't do that to it. He heard that secret experiments were taking place in its underground laboratory, and that was the reason for the attack. Revelin instantly grabbed the old man by the clothes. She ordered him to repeat it, and the old man screamed in fear. What was she doing all of a sudden? Revelin removed the hood from her head. She ominously asked, "What happened to the magical tower of Bohemern?" After a while, Pythes slammed his mug against his comrades and congratulated them on the squad's safe return. After completing the subjugation of the bandits, they returned to Pythe's territory. The Baron hosted a banquet. Pythe remarked that they had worked very hard. It's a miracle that no one died. Only he doesn't understand where Asher is. The Baron, his face flushed from alcohol, exclaimed, "Here comes the protagonist." MC adjusted his neckerchief and asked, "Is he late?" Pythe joyfully raised his glasses and exclaimed that the MC had arrived just in time. He suggested they drink some wine first. Verdun thanked the Baron and noted that he hadn't expected even ordinary soldiers to be invited to the banquet. Pythe replied that they had risen to defend the territory. What does status matter? The Baron remembered the bandits Asher had defeated and wondered if they were too strong for mere bandits. The protagonist agreed and said that they were nothing like the bandits he knew. With such a level of skill, they could live comfortably doing something else. Pythe agreed and, raising his hand, suggested that this might clarify the situation. According to the investigation, these guys were gold-ranked adventurers, but about a year or two ago, one of them killed his own comrade and fled. After that, their whereabouts became unknown, but apparently they formed a gang and ended up here. Gold rank is the fourth highest among adventurers, which can only be obtained through numerous achievements. Verdun looked at the investigation results and thought it was no wonder they had a 10 million elk bounty. So that's why the Baron looked so pleased? If the protagonist hadn't been involved, the casualties could have been more serious. MC looked at the Baron in surprise. Pythe smiled with great joy, and Verdun asked why the Baron was looking at him like that. Pythe exclaimed with great happiness that MC had not only destroyed the bandits, but also dealt with the demi-humans in place of the fallen adventurers. The Adventurers Guild also sent thanks. Asher is the pride of their territory. The protagonist sheepishly replied that he was simply doing what he had to. He thought it looked like the Baron had drunk too much. Pythe put his fist to his mouth and, coughing, clarified that he suspected the wine was having a strong effect on him. In any case, thanks to Asher, they saved the villagers taken by bandits and gave the victims a proper funeral. The Baron asked to raise their glasses to the protagonist, the mage who saved the territory of Pythe. Everyone raised their glasses and shouted, "To Asher." The banquet that followed had a completely different atmosphere from what the protagonist had seen in the Magic Tower. A banquet where everyone had fun together, regardless of status. In the Magic Tower, everything was different. The warmth and friendliness here deeply touched MC. For the first time since escaping from the tower, he could laugh heartily. All this time, no one yet realized what changes the destruction of Bohemern would soon bring. After some time, Revelin, smiling, wondered if the tower had really survived completely. The rumors were probably exaggerated. The mage, holding a box in his hand, turned to her. He asked if she had just returned from Varent. Revelin agreed and said that she heard that the energy source had gone out of control and destroyed the area. But everything looks better than expected. What a relief. The mage noted that the buildings could be quickly restored. Revelin happily turned her head to the side and asked where Verdun was. The mage pointed at the crowd of people and replied that the protagonist was there. There was a sign on the notice board with a list of missing persons. Revelin instantly fell into a stupor. She looked at the list and thought that this couldn't be. The board said that missing person number 3 was Verdun. He disappeared while on duty in the power room. It is assumed that he was exposed to magical energy. His body was not found. Revelin wondered, how could this be? She remembered all the moments spent with MC. Revelin wondered if that meeting was really their last. She covered her eyes with her hands and screamed. Revelin thought in horror that no, she didn't want to part like this. He was like family to her, a dear friend. Balrog put his hand on her head and asked her to stop. He noted that anger at others wouldn't change anything. Revelin raised her head and looked at the leader. She immediately lowered her head and asked what exactly had happened in the tower. Balrog put his jacket on her and replied that the power source had failed during the festival. All the mages in the Corps, including the duty officer, had died. The leader thought that not only that, but years of accumulated data and research records had also been destroyed. Even the treasury's magic circle had been damaged, leading to irreparable losses. Everything in the treasury, the collection of spellbooks and artifacts, was gone. The damage was incalculable, but the most significant loss was experimental subject number 77. If they returned the protagonist's brain, they could restore the lost records and achievements. Balrog smiled, placing a hand on Rovellin's shoulder, and added that at the very least, they could get revenge. Although they had missed the main culprit of the power surge, they had a lead. Rovellin quickly turned her head to the side and asked what the leader meant. Balrog replied that 3 hours before the power surge, someone disappeared without a trace. He used all his connections to track this person's location and passed. The leader, looking horrified, picked up the necklace and clarified that he had found it. Rovellin raised her hands in amazement and clarified, "Is this the symbol of the Dark Hour?" She thought that the Dark Hour was a group that didn't just secretly study magic, but sought to subjugate the world with it. What were they doing here? The leader sternly said that they didn't know how the Dark Hour had infiltrated the tower and caused the power surge, but they were certain that the Dark Hour was involved. To appease those who had died, he intended to create a team to eliminate the Dark Hour, and a place on the team was reserved for Rovellin. Judging by Rovellin's expression, he could see that she had already made her decision. Rovellin angrily broke the necklace and scattered the shards on the ground. A few days later, the Explorers Guild arrived in Pytha territory. The guild representative thanked the protagonist for waiting. He asked to apologize to Asher for the incident. The representative, with great tension, said that they assessed the orc threat as high, so they sent gold-ranked explorers. But the results were terrible. Verdun calmly noted that it was just an accident. The representative, wiping sweat from his face with a towel, placed the sheet on the table and thanked the protagonist for his understanding. He clarified that here was the reward certificate for this conquest. MC looked at the certificate and thought that, taking into account the risk fee and the reward for delivering the body of the new type of orc, the total amount was 24 million elks. After taxes, half would remain. The representative waved his hand and said that Asher might not know, but for independent individuals not registered in the guild, a tax of half the fee is levied on all rewards. Even if they want to refuse it, they can't because it's imperial law. Violating it can lead to charges of tax evasion or embezzlement, but there is one legal way to avoid taxes. Verdun clarified, "The representative wants him to become an adventurer?" The representative stood up from the couch and exclaimed, "Exactly. Their guild has low tax rates for the highest ranks. Since the protagonist is a special case, he will start at silver rank." MC thought that becoming an adventurer would limit his future actions. The representative simply asked him to sign the application. Verdun thought that what was more important than money now was becoming stronger, so he could take revenge. The protagonist smiled, agreed, and exclaimed, "I agree." He thought, more important than money is becoming stronger so he can get revenge. The worker asked in surprise, "Excuse me?" Despite MC living as a test subject in Bohemern for 7 years, his essence remains that of a mage. The Seekers Adventurers Guild warehouse is in Pate territory. A mage is always a seeker of secrets and a researcher, so he brought the corpse of an orc he defeated here for full-scale research. He removed the cloak, and looking at the body, thought, perhaps they have an artifact that preserves the state of whatever it's covered in. Well, the Adventurers Guild is in Pate territory, so whatever. Then he abruptly covered his nose and thought he was going to vomit. After that, he began examining it and said, "Nevertheless, this orc, his red pupils and reddish skin are nothing surprising. But what stands out is perhaps his torn mouth and his more powerful build compared to other creatures. But these features are far from anything seen in more advanced species, such as orc warriors or orc lords." He sat down next to it and thought that its intelligence also couldn't be called exceptional. Rather, it was a mutation, an evolution. But such a conclusion still seemed wrong. Even if it were a mutation, it wasn't enough to explain his regeneration and incredible strength, achieved solely through nutrition. Then, surprised, he asked, "Is that a scar?" He thought regeneration was the ability to return the body to its previous state. This orc's power was strong enough to restore a burned body and even tear flesh, but it couldn't handle a wound. If that's the case, the orc must have acquired his regenerative abilities after being wounded. This is the mark of a cut. Only evolution could have contributed to the ability being acquired after birth. If so, then that's the most likely conclusion. He said someone had artificially created him, and that was very bad. After a while, he came out to meet him and said there was no need to come here to see him off. Conrad waved his hand and, smiling, said, "It's nothing. He saved his life, so that's the least he can do." Enoch nodded. The protagonist awkwardly scratched his cheek and said he felt like he'd already received too much. He had a circulation ring, a robe made of beast hide. The increase in mana is insignificant. The increase in mana recovery rate is insignificant. Enoch asked him to relax. This is a well-deserved reward, and it belongs to him, Sir Asher. The protagonist thanked him for his words and turning slightly said, "Then he'll be going." They should take care of themselves until they meet again. He headed in the right direction, and Conrad shouted, Sir Asher, if he ever visits the Conrad Merchant Guild branch in another city, he should just mention his name. He won't regret it. A border village between Pate and Martes. The protagonist landed and said, flight cancellation. He looked at the map and thought, so this is the only village between them. Then he took an apple from a nearby vendor and thought, if he stops here for the night and heads to town tomorrow, that would be perfect. Then he reached out to take a bite and heard the man say, damn it. Addressing his comrade, he added, who would have thought things would turn out like this? The protagonist thought, this sounds like there might be some useful information here. Maybe he should listen in a bit and see what's going on? Then he used Wind Whisper and heard a man say, anyway, the problem is the goblins. They stole all their livestock and paid a lot of money to hire adventurers, even though they said they could handle it themselves. His companion said someone might get hurt because of this. The village chief said that subjugating goblins is the job of adventurers. Remember, it'll all be over by tomorrow morning, so stop complaining. He said, and their services are expensive. The MC took a bite of his apple and thought, are the goblins here? To ordinary people, they're just insects, starting with petty thefts. But when there are a lot of them, they attack a village, steal goods, and eat people. So when goblins are spotted, the standard reaction is to call in adventurers. I guess there's nothing unusual about that. With these thoughts, he placed the apple core on the box and, pulling up his hood, heard a man ask, by the way, are the rumors true? You know about James seeing a monster in the forest? The man put his hands in front of him and shouted. The village chief forbade him to talk about it. His comrade said, God, no one listens anyway. It was a few days ago, in his opinion. He went to check the trap he set in the forest. But then, hearing the squeal of a wild boar, he turned around, and there was a goblin with a torn mouth, bigger than an orc, devouring a boar. He was surprised. Bigger than an orc? Was he serious? He replied, quiet. If the adventurer's here, they'll have to pay extra. Then the protagonist snapped his fingers and said, cancel. He thought about it. He didn't expect to hear that. A big goblin with a torn mouth, right? It's hard to dismiss it as a coincidence. Sometime later, in the forest, Myrna, a silver-ranked adventurer, fired an arrow, hitting a monster squarely in the head. She asked how he felt. She'd improved, hadn't she? Loke, a silver-ranked adventurer, folded his arms and said thoughtfully, she's bragging about hitting a target that was right under her nose? How shameful. She glared at him and asked if his nose wasn't a bit long then. Then, Eris and Mild, also silver-ranked adventurers, approached them. Eris put her hand to her face and said, they're on a mission, so that's enough. Then, she looked at Mild and asked if he'd found any goblin tracks. He pointed to the side and said, there's a cave over there that looks like a goblin lair. They walked closer and hid behind some bushes. Eris looked ahead and said, a totem made of animal and human bones, a symbol of a superior species, the hobgoblins. If they are careful, everything will be fine. The first thing they will do before entering is destroy all warning devices and totems. Loke, stepping on a handful of bones, said, I understand. Then she closed her eyes and used her piercing gaze. The rest of the team looked around in surprise. Myrna, looking at her hand, said she could see clearly in the dark. Then Eris said that now, even without a flashlight, they were not afraid of the darkness. Loke turned and said, as one would expect from a leader, she can be relied upon, as always. Then they went inside. After that, they went deeper into the cave. Eris turned around in surprise and Myrna asked what happened. She answered, nothing. She thought she felt mana. Inside the cave, several goblins were worshipping a totem made of human bones. The next second, an arrow flew into the head of one of the goblins, and one of the squad members shouted, now! The rest quickly rushed to attack. Myrna smiled and said, everything is going smoothly. Looks like they'll handle this quickly, right? With these words, she pulled the arrow from the goblin's head. Eris, looking at her, told her not to let her guard down. After that, they all looked ahead, and Myrna, walking around the corner, turned around and said, it could be a hobgoblin. She'll go check it out. Eris said, okay, she must be careful. If something happens, she must give the signal. After a while, she walked forward and saw many goblin bodies. Loke looked behind her and asked, what's wrong? She spoke, as if to say something. She thought she heard something that sent a chill down her spine. The rest of the squad members approached. Everyone stopped near a huge goblin that was devouring its own kind. They were surprised, wondering what the hell it was. Eris wondered if the giant was eating its own kind. Was it some kind of mutant? But no one had said they could encounter something like that. Right now, they needed to focus on destroying it. It was huge, but if they were alone, they could handle it. Then she said she would explain the plan. She held her staff in front of her and said, Myrna, she has the right eye. Mild and Loke, they must distract the creature. She will finish it off. After that, everyone went to attack. Myrna kicked off the ground and pulled back the bowstring, which hit the monster right in the eye. Loke ran forward and shouted, Mild, he must raise his shield. Then he ran on, and Mild blocked the attack with his shield. After that, Loke made a cut on the huge monster's shoulder and flew on. He thought, okay, I got it. After that, he landed on the ground, and the huge goblin extended his hand towards him. The next second, Eris created several magical symbols around herself and cast Mana Burst. Several magical attacks hit the monster directly. The goblin clutched his face and began screaming loudly. Then he grabbed one of the bodies lying on the ground and threw it forward. Loke shouted, throwing the goblin, Eris, she has to duck. She froze in fear, watching the goblin approaching her. At that moment, MC, hiding behind the wall, said, air rails. At that moment, the goblin flew into the wall and seemed to explode. Eris sank to her knees in fear and sighed. The next second, another arrow hit the monster in the head, and it fell to the ground. Myrna cried out in alarm. Eris, is she okay? Was she not hit? Na replied that she was fine. She thought that if the goblin had hit her, she would have died, but the trajectory changed mid-flight. How was that possible? Then Myrna said, in any case, thank heavens. They completed the mission without any harm. Okay, they should hurry to the village to collect their reward. At that moment, the protagonist, having created a magic symbol in his hand, peeked around the corner and said, good thing everyone's safe. It wasn't for nothing that he'd used invisibility and followed. Thanks to this, he spotted one of the laboratory's research subjects. All the subjects he'd encountered since escaping the tower had one thing in common, a wide mouth, reminiscent of a jester's smile. Because of this, he began calling all these creatures jesters. But this goblin was different from most. Unlike the others, it didn't possess enhanced physical strength and apparently didn't regenerate or become stronger by devouring its own kind. Perhaps it was simply a large goblin or a failed experiment? Still, this sorceress. At that moment, Eris stepped forward and said, just in case, they should check to see if any goblins were left. Myrna, she should keep an eye on the surrounding area. Loken mild, they should choose other paths. The protagonist thought she had a good sense of mana and was leading the party. She'd sensed his mana before entering the cave. Then he sighed and said, thank goodness she couldn't track him. Then he looked to the side and heard Surgeon say, oh my god, who came here while he was gone? He spread his arms, walking forward, and Eris turned and said, he doesn't look like an adventurer. Who is he? If he comes any closer, she'll use a spell. He placed his hand on his chest and said, he apologizes for introducing himself late. He's the guardian of this place, the one they destroyed. He shouldn't have been too active, but even building a totem and attracting attention isn't enough to subdue his instincts. Oh, by the way, did they notice anything strange about this goblin? Any unusual behavior? Hearing silence in response, he put a hand to his face and added, judging by their silence, he realized he was simply a big. If the professor found out about this, he'd be very upset. But what could he do? What's done can't be undone. Better to start with what he could fix, and that meant they all had to die here. The squad members looked at him with alarm, and then Eris asked, did he mean to say he'd fight them all alone? He replied, of course. This specimen died because of them, and their experiments are limited. Even if that hadn't happened, there was no guarantee they wouldn't blab about what they'd seen and the grotto itself. Eris countered, but only if they gave their word they wouldn't. He reached for his weapon and asked, what guarantees? There weren't any, my dear. But even if there were, he wasn't gonna let them go. Frankly, he just really wanted to hear their screams. With these words, he held the weapon in front of him and asked, so, who wants to die first? At this point, MC said, only he will die here. He smiled in response and said, such bravado. Then he looked to the side and thought, wait, a voice came from behind. Who said that? At this point, the protagonist launched an attack, knocking him aside and landing, saying things like, I want to hear their screams. Who wants to die? Then he's trying to show off and seem cool, right? With these words, he concentrated the magic symbol in his hand and the energy in the crystal of his staff. He thought that he hadn't intended to interfere, but if he hadn't, he thought the man in black would have really killed them all. And by the way, he called the goblin a test subject and mentioned someone behind the scenes whom he called a professor. Without a doubt, this has something to do with the jesters. And then Surgeon angrily asked, who is he? He replied that he didn't think he had to answer that question. With these words, he concentrated magical symbols in front of him, and Surgeon, taking a stance, said, well fine, even if he doesn't reveal his identity, it won't change the fact that he will die by his hand. With these words, he quickly ran forward, and MC used multi-fire arrows, directing a fire attack forward. Surgeon, jumping from side to side, continued to run forward rapidly, and then aimed his weapon forward, but hit a barrier and covered it with cracks. The protagonist then used Mana Pulse, spreading energy around and throwing the enemy aside. He flew back, and the protagonist thought, such speed. Has he enhanced himself with energy? The weight of his sword strikes is lighter than those of the knight from Pate, but his speed far exceeds them. He thought he could finish him with one blow. He will have to change his strategy. Surgeon again held his sword in front of him and said that he uses magic quickly. He doesn't know what rank he is, but in this case, he will also increase his speed. Then he ran forward and shouted that now they would see how he handled this. In response, MC once again concentrated energy in his hands and used Winter Wind and Ice Pike, a dual spell. Surgeon frowned and thought in surprise, using both ice and wind elements at the same time. After that, the protagonist used Ice Pike Burst. The ice attack spread around, and Surgeon, trying to dodge, shouted in surprise, a dual spell with 2 elements? Impressive, of course, but if he missed, then everything was pointless. At that moment, he appeared behind the protagonist, swung his weapon, but the protagonist easily dodged his attack, and Surgeon, perplexed, thought, a simple mage had dodged his attack? Eris, watching what was happening, wondered in surprise how he had managed to react at such speed. The next second, the protagonist used combustion, covering everything around him in flames. Afterwards, Surgeon, kneeling, said he'd provoked him to counterattack. This wasn't a typical mage tactic, but it was all he had, and the trick wouldn't work anymore. The protagonist asked, so traps wouldn't work anymore either? Then he'd fight like a real mage. He then moved his hand back, lifting up a section of the ground the party members were sitting on. They screamed, what? Loke croaked in surprise. What is this? The ground is suddenly rising. Where are they? Mild shouted, How high will they be? The next second, the hills stopped. Eris, looking down, asked, is this terrain manipulation? A spell known for its efficiency in mana usage, but he'd used it in real combat. Dual casting and quickly casting large-scale spells? His mana reserves must be enormous. This is such a fighting style. She'd never even heard of anything like it. Then Surgeon, grinning, asked, what is this? He said he would fight as a mage, but he just ran away. Does he think he can't do anything since he's up there? He thought, wait, he'd teleported up there? Sure. But why did he take all the adventurers up there, despite the extreme mana consumption? Then he looked down in surprise and thought, this? He saw his reflection in the water gathering below him and asked, did the flames melt the ice? The next second, MC concentrated energy in his hands, and Surgeon screamed in fear. It can't be! Eris screamed in surprise. Is this lightning magic? The next second, electrical impulses flew in all directions from the protagonist, hitting the water right on the surface. He thought, even among the Academy's professors, only a few can use this element. He used third-tier magic, Thunderstrike. At that moment, Surgeon, grimacing in pain, screamed, damn it, who the hell is this guy? Fire, ice, wind, and now even higher elements. After this, the protagonist cast a triple spell. Several more types of energy were directed at their opponent, creating an explosion and raising clouds of smoke. When the smoke began to clear, leaving a pile of rubble, the protagonist descended and said he wanted to ask a question. In the Peak Barony, there was an orc similar to the deceased goblin giant. Are they somehow connected to this professor? With these words, he pointed his staff at Surgeon, whose entire body was trembling, and he replied, so that's why it was so quiet there? He's behind this, right? He smirked and asked, did he come from the Ark? The protagonist thought in surprise, the Ark? Then Surgeon continued, it seems he's never heard of this before. It's okay if he doesn't know, he should kill him. MC replied that before he did that, he needed to tell him where he could find a profession. He asked why. He replied that he was interested in the experiments they were conducting. Surgeon considered whether it would be dangerous to let him get to the professor, and then he said, okay, he's here. After that, he shouted that he would simply die along with him. With these words, he spat a sharp shard from his mouth, aiming it directly at the protagonist. But at that moment, a barrier appeared in front of him, protecting him from the attack, and he said, that's his answer. Okay. After that, he used Earth Destruction. He thought that he had hoped to find a clue leading to the appearance of the jesters, but in the end, his efforts were in vain. Then, he released the squad members and thought, okay, whatever. I need to finish what I started. After that, he said, so now they must all obey his orders. Sometime later, they were outside, and Eris said, as he'd ordered, they'd received an additional reward from the village elder. She held a bag of money in her hands and added that when she threatened to report the leaked information about the goblin mutant, he paid her an additional 1.2 million elks to keep her quiet. The protagonist looked at the bag of money in his hands, and then Eris turned and said, okay. Now that their business here is done, they're leaving. The protagonist handed her the bag and told her to wait. He asked her to take this. She turned around and asked, what? He explained that it was their commission, the city of Martes. He asked her to escort him from this village to Martes. After the incidents in the cave, he began traveling to Martes with Eris's team. Along the way, the team leader asked him about magic. More specifically, she asked about the elemental theory of magic. He wasn't opposed to conversation, so he engaged her in a discussion. They didn't notice how time flew by, and they arrived in Martes. Looking around, the protagonist thought, a city this size surely has a bank, right? After that, Lok said, then, since they need to submit several reports to the guild, they should go this way. Their leader will show him around Martes. After that, Eris asked, sir, where does he want to go first? The protagonist replied that he would like to start by receiving a reward and opening a bank account. She replied, in that case, they should go to the city hall first. She pointed her finger forward and said, this way, please. She knows Martes like the back of her hand. Mild, watching her, noticed that she looked so capable. Myrna was surprised, right? He was the one who killed the man they met in the cave without hesitation. Rewards for captured criminals are primarily issued through the city hall. They approached the city hall quest, and MC thought he almost got into trouble because he didn't have time to create an ID after switching bodies. At that moment, the knight shook his head, holding out his hand and saying they couldn't pass until he confirmed his identity. Fortunately, thanks to Baron Pite's guarantee, he was allowed in. After a while, he showed the permit and thought about it, and when he learned he'd brought a letter of recommendation from the Baron, the mayor laughed joyfully and said, good man, he's already received the message. He heard he'd done something impressive. Before leaving Pite Barony, he'd shown him generosity. He should accept this token of their gratitude for saving Pite. He said his family lived on the Baron's territory and expressed his gratitude for defeating the bandits, then unexpectedly presented them with an ID card. Thanks to this, he was able to open a bank account, so everything worked out well. He also has an account he used in Varant, but if he uses that, the tower's master might be able to track it, so he'll have to be very careful. After that, he said he'd like it made in the form of a staff. The forge worker looked at the weapon and said he'd need materials and a little time to make it, and he should come back in 3 days. After that, the protagonist looked at the staff in his hands, and the worker told him to use it for now. Eris asked if he preferred staves to wands. MC replied that he was just used to using one when he worked a lot with a broom. She was surprised. A broom? He asked if they should go further. After some time, they approached a building, and Eris explained that it was the Marktez Public Library. The protagonist asked if there should be spellbooks here, right? She smiled awkwardly and said there should be, but perhaps not at a level that would satisfy him, Master Mage. He replied, no problem, the basic ones will do. She asked how many he wanted. He turned his gaze to her and replied, everything. She exclaimed in confusion. What? Sometime later, in the large hall of the public library, the worker, standing next to a huge stack of books, smiled awkwardly and apologized, saying he couldn't just. MC handed him a card and asked him to deposit the money into his account and deliver it to the top floor of the Lurix Hotel. The worker looked surprised and then asked how many books he wanted them to deliver. The protagonist replied, all of them. The worker thought, this is their biggest sale yet. After a while, MC thought he'd received his reward, opened a bank account, ordered a staff, and rented all the books on magic. They were sitting at a table in a small establishment. Eris lowered her head onto the table and thought desperately. She was so tired. Then she turned her gaze to him and wondered, who was this man? She asked, did she take him to all the places he wanted to go? He, without looking up from his reading, confirmed it. That's enough for today, she thought in surprise. For today? Then she added, she remembered, she never asked his name. What should she call him? He replied that his name was Asher, and that she could call him however she liked. She rose from her seat and said, then she would do so, and she asked him to speak to her informally. He thought she had gotten carried away quickly, and she thought that now was her chance to ask what she really wanted to know. She apologized for meddling in other people's business and all that, but why was he in that cave? He, hiding his face behind the book, thought about what he should say. The truth? That he saved them by accident? It would be strange to say that he just happened to be there. He would have to come up with an excuse. After that, he said that then he would do without formality. He was pursuing that man. She was surprised, that man? Then she looked out the window and thought, now that she thought about it, he really was asking about the professor in the cave. Was he some kind of secret agent pursuing a shadowy organization? Then the protagonist closed the book and said, in the end, he didn't get much out of it. That was more than enough for today, so she could go back. She said she'd take him there. Was he here for the first time? He replied, no need to go that far. Oh well. As night fell, Eris waved and said, then have a good night. See you tomorrow. She placed her hand on her waist, sighed and said, finally, they're done. She sat down on the bench and leaned her whole body against it, saying that he really was a strange man. She thought he had such a high level of magic that he could control all the elements, a volume of mana she couldn't even measure, and at such a young age, he had a theoretical understanding that the academy professors didn't have, and he explained things well himself. Plus, with such a handsome face, he should be very popular. But when you start talking to them, he gets strangely tense. It's almost like talking to a scarecrow, or maybe he's just relying on his appearance. And then she cried out indignantly, what the hell? Why can't she get his face out of her head? She thought, but of all the mages she'd met since graduating from the academy and starting work, he's definitely the most talented. Then she clenched her fist and said, you don't meet such a talented person every day. Tomorrow she'll ask him even more about elemental magic. The next second, she ducked sharply as a powerful explosion occurred behind her, in the building standing behind her. She turned around and cried out in surprise. What? She thought it was the Lurix Hotel? Asher said he'd be staying there? Is that a silhouette of a person there? Seeing the protagonist, she asked, what, Asher? After a while, Nick approached the professor and said, Surgeon is dead. The professor asked who killed him. He replied that traces of magic were found in the cave, so someone else killed him. Before he could finish speaking, a bottle flew at him, smashing on his head. The professor told him not to play dumb. He asked who killed Sargent. He replied that they hadn't yet identified the killer, but they had found evidence that someone had accepted the village's contract. The professor said that was disappointing. Sargent was useful, so the test subjects were dead too? He confirmed it. The remains, any traces of Sargent, and the subject were destroyed. The professor looked at the flask and said, he's useless trash. He should have taken care of whoever killed Sargent. Then he thought, the two test subjects from the Pipe Barony are silent. Now the Goblin and Surgeon are dead. After that, he said, the experiment is almost complete. Maybe those freaks from the Ark have already noticed them. He shouldn't return until he kills the one responsible for Surgeon's death. His subordinate bowed and said he understood. Adjusting the mask on his face, he thought, stupid old idiot. He will find the killer, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, MC walked into the room and, holding the book in his hand, said, a regular cat ears spell. Is that how it's done? He thought about it, so he returned, wandered around the city all day. Then he said, the magic detector is really ineffective. At that moment, Nick, hiding, thought he should go to bed quickly, as soon as he fell asleep. Then it would be his last moment. Wait, why is it so quiet? Then the protagonist used the Earthbone. Nick thought, damn, a powerful magical attack headed straight for him, destroying the building. He thought, he'd been discovered, but how? After some time, MC found himself in the center of a raging fire. Nick, trying to escape, turned around and thought, damn, there was an explosion right away. How come he wasn't scared in that confined space? He's at least level 3. He'll retreat for now. Then, continuing to run, he shouted, the mage has gone crazy. He's going to destroy the city. Those present were surprised. What? The city? He shouted for them to run and notify the guards. The protagonist watched what was happening with a milky expression and thought, the killer to whom his magic detection had reacted. But he was impatient and made a mistake, completely concealing his presence, making his existence even more noticeable, like a black hole on a white page. He then locked eyes with him and unleashed a magical attack, sending Nick flying back, thinking, damn it, how did he sense him? He turned around and shouted, what the hell did the Ark send? He thought, he's never heard of such a monster. Doesn't he even care that there are civilians around? He keeps casting a spell. He's just nuts. At that moment, MC concentrated a huge magical symbol over his hand and fired a magical arrow, aiming it straight at Nick. But he closed his eyes and leaped forward, launching himself into the building, destroying the door. The protagonist wondered if he'd entered the building to dodge his attack. After that, he landed and, going inside, thought, out of all the houses, he chose the one with the homeless gang. At that moment, a man approached him and asked, why barge in like that and cause panic out of nowhere? MC apologized and asked where the man had gone. He responded by remarking that he was impatient, young man. If he wanted information, he'd have to pay for it. The protagonist turned around and thought there was no other way out. He had to be still inside. The next second, he saw drops of blood in front of him. He turned and saw Nick attack the man from behind. He thought he killed an innocent man, and in the back, no less. How vile. After that, he used a shockwave, spreading energy around and throwing Nick aside. He skidded to a stop, stabbing his sword into the floor, and thought, mages usually can't attack and defend at the same time. That's if he lured him in, forcing him to use a magical barrier. He detonated a smoke bomb and escaped. The next second, he kicked off the ground and charged, drawing his sword in front of him. He thought, okay, he should use a magical barrier. The next second, MC said, Earthbone. He thought, this isn't a barrier. Is he focusing mana on the end of his staff? At that moment, the protagonist swung his staff, and he thought, he's not losing in close combat either. Could this man really be a battle mage? The next second, a burst of energy was aimed straight at him. Nick coughed, flying to the side, and MC used Earthbone again. He flew straight at the magical symbol and then bit off the fuse and thought, damn it. After this, the building was filled with a huge amount of smoke. The protagonist, waving his hand, used a whirlwind, dispersing the smoke. Looking around, he asked, did he escape? And then he turned back and heard a voice. He must not move. The knight pointed his sword at him and said that he was under arrest for arson and for threatening the locals and the city. After some time, Mayor Henry Dacre said, okay, they'll summarize the report just given. He's claiming Asher is behind the chaos that unfolded in the city. His subordinate replied, that's not true, Mr. Mayor. The mage Asher is apparently the victim in this situation. Someone tried to kill him when he returned, leading to a clash and unrest. This also seems to be connected to a recent incident in which an attempt was made to kill an adventurer associated with their guild. Therefore, he asked to lead the investigation. Oscar was the head of the Adventurers Guild. Henry said that if so, he could imagine what impression Asher would leave of their city. Was the inn badly damaged? Oscar replied, only the top floor, where Asher was staying, and a wanted criminal from the slums was killed. The person responsible is wanted. They also received testimony from the adventurer who had protected Asher. He claimed to have encountered mutant goblins and an armed assailant in a cave while on a honey-gathering mission. But when they visited the scene, there was nothing there at all. No corpses, no monsters, not even traces of other creatures. The mayor put his hand to his head and said, this means, including the latest assassination attempt, there's an organized group targeting adventurers. He means similar incidents could happen? Oscar confirmed this. That's why he tried to assign Asher a bodyguard. Henry looked at him and asked, is there a problem with that? He replied, rumors have already spread throughout the city that he was the one who orchestrated the explosion and sowed panic. That's why both adventurers and soldiers are refusing to guard him. The mayor noted that the situation was complicated. It was true. Okay, he'll talk to his knights. The next day, City Hall. MC, holding the staff in his hand, sat down on the table and thought that the enchantment had been successful. Since the equipment was ready, he should begin pursuit immediately. The next second, he heard a voice saying that he was entering. Jason entered the room and asked, he's Mr. Asher, right? He's Jason, the deputy captain of the Martez Knights. As long as there's a risk of them being attacked again, he will guard him. Questions? He looked at the protagonist and wondered, is this why the whole city is in such a tizzy? Then the protagonist looked at him and asked, a bodyguard? He thought he'd been cleared of the charges. He thought about it, but he looks so young. And still, he's level 3? Then he said, one question, can he go? Jason replied, only if he's with him. The protagonist asked, a deputy captain, right? It's a shame, but it can't be helped. They have to go. He suddenly found himself ahead, and his newly appointed bodyguard was surprised. What? What did he just say? He has to stop. Where is he going? Half a day later, Jason shouted indignantly, seriously, where are they going? MC turned around and said no, he doesn't understand. He himself said that he is free to go wherever he wants with him. He shouted, but they haven't sat down once since they left the city hall. How far are they still? He doesn't understand. The protagonist replied that they are here. This is the place he wanted to visit. At that moment, they stopped after the building. Jason, looking ahead, thought, did they walk all this way to get here? Then he asked, why are they even here? Then MC pointed his staff at the building. creating a powerful explosion. Jason thought, this guy is seriously crazy. He just blew up the house with magic? Then the protagonist said that he came to find one person, the killer who tried to finish him off yesterday. The bodyguard asked, is the killer here? MC confirmed this and, looking around, thought about how he'd managed to touch him and cast a spell during the fight with him last night. He'd recently acquired a spell that linked the target's mana to his, called Trace. Since the mark hadn't gone anywhere, it meant the attacker hadn't noticed. Jason thought his power was impressive. He leaned over and asked, is this an underground passage? They were looking at the stairs leading under the building. The protagonist directed his magical ability forward and thought that's where the trace led. After that, he said, judging by the direction and scale, it connected to the outside of the city. Did he know about this tunnel? He replied that he hadn't even guessed at such a thing, although he knew all the passages in the city. But this was the first he'd heard of this. He thought, wait, an unknown tunnel that wasn't marked on the map and leads outside of Martes? So they have some serious security problems. Then he held his sword in front of him and shouted that they need to close this place down immediately. The MC waved his hand and said he would wait. The most important thing now was to find whoever blew up the hotel. He said they should call for reinforcements then. The protagonist replied that that wasn't true. The target would escape. They needed to follow immediately. After that, he abruptly jumped down. Jason thought, damn, just because he's vice captain, he thinks he can ignore him? He doesn't even consider him human. All these mages really like to put on airs, idiots. He jumped down with these thoughts and thought that they were incredibly annoying. Meanwhile, Nick walked forward, holding his injured arm. He clenched his teeth and said, damn, he'd wasted too much time. He thought after he escaped from the mage, he had to heal his wounds and clean up his tracks. So he's been hanging around here for too long now. If this continues, the professor will try to kill him. Then he asked, maybe he should run away? He shook his head and thought it was pointless. The professor had a way to get him. He could only hope he'd be merciful. At that moment, the professor told him to see who was there. He was the most famous face in Martes, meaning when he came to check if he was dead, he created a riot. He created such a spectacle that the mayor and the Adventurers Guild now knew about them. What kind of assassin would spread information about their target throughout the entire district? He had to explain what had happened clearly and succinctly. His subordinate, looking down, said that upon receiving the order, he immediately went to Martes and checked the transportation department. Then he found out where the man lived and set an ambush. But he somehow sensed him and cast a powerful spell. He hid among the crowd and tried to escape, but the mage pursued him the whole way. He barely managed to lose him and used a smoke bomb. The professor pointed at him and said angrily, a bomb? He expects me to believe he escaped solely because of the smoke? He replied that he thought it was because his escape coincided with the arrival of the knights. Maybe that's why he retreated. The professor thought, this idiot thinks he'll believe that some crazy mage who cast a spell in the city surrendered simply because of smoke and the appearance of a few soldiers. Stop! He pointed a finger at him and shouted at him to take off his armor right now and burn it. Nick was surprised. What does he mean? The professor clicked to burn it faster. Idiot. After that, he actually took off his armor and set it on fire with a spell. He wondered why there were still traces of mana on this armor. Had he cast a tracking spell on it? Then the professor screamed in fear. They've been tracked. He'll take a sample. He has to destroy everything and seal the entrance. Nick screamed, yes. Then he ran forward at a rapid pace, but at that moment, a powerful explosion occurred in front of him. The protagonist said, so that's why the connection with the trail disappeared. He detected the mark, but unfortunately, it was too late. MC looked ahead and thought, he'll see. The build, the stance, it seems like it's the same guy who attacked him. If so, then the professor must be behind him. Then the professor gritted his teeth and asked, so he's the crazy mage? The Ark summoned a very strange guy this time. The protagonist thought, Ark? This isn't the first time he's heard that name. First, he'll pump him up to the max, then he'll ask a question. After that, he used the earth spear. Nick stood in front of the professor and swung his weapon. The professor shouted indignantly, idiot! Where is he going? What are they going to do now? He apologized in response. The professor said there was no choice. They'd have to continue with the plan. He turned in the opposite direction and, starting to run, shouted how he wanted to. He had to buy himself time. At that moment, the protagonist concentrated energy around himself and thought that he was going nowhere. He used a magic arrow, and Nick stood in front of him, waving his weapon, and shouted, not so fast. He apologizes, but he can't go there. The protagonist thought, a weak arrow can be blocked, but if he hits too hard, he will kill this man and not know anything. What to do? Then Jason entered the fray. The swordsman's weapons clashed. He shouted that he would hold him back. He must go. He will follow? At that moment, he looked in fascination at the protagonist, who was rapidly flying forward, and thought that he hadn't even thanked him. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued on his way and wondered where he had gone. The professor couldn't have gone far. Then he stopped, covering his face with his hand, and thought about this smell, the rot and decomposition of bodies. He stopped on the bridge. The professor stood a little further away and, grinning, said that he hadn't expected that idiot to stop him, but he didn't think he'd show up so quickly. But he was glad he'd come. He really wanted to show him the result of his labor. What did he think? At that moment, a grate appeared behind him, revealing the glowing eyes and sharp teeth of monsters. He shouted, how do you like his creation? MC said, so these are the jesters he saw. He's got a whole squad here, right? The professor grinned, spread his arms wide, and asked, jesters? It sounded like he was mocking them. This is a new round of evolution, my dear sir. Although these aren't the most successful examples, since they don't fully reflect his ideals, it's still enough to tear any intruder to pieces. Then he pressed a button on the remote and said, well, in short, he should appreciate his work. The next second, several monsters ran towards the protagonist. He said he didn't have time. He used Wave and Thunderclap, then used Doubling and Thunderwave. Powerful bursts of energy scattered in all directions. The professor, who had flown back, screamed, "What?" He fell to the ground, his body still electrocuted, and he screamed. He's crazy, he thought. Damn it, he's been tricked. He thought he was just a 3rd level mage, but to do something like this. This man must be at least 4th level or closer to the top. He turned around and, trying to get up, screamed. He spent decades completing his research, and now everything can disappear in a minute. This can't be. With these words, he pressed the huge red button and, looking at the cryo chamber, screamed, "It's time to awaken his masterpiece." The protagonist stood behind him and asked where he was crawling. Rat? The professor rose to his feet, turned around, and shouted, "What the hell? The squad was supposed to kill him." He said, "Bad news. He burned them all." He smelled something. Smelled something fried? The professor, enraged, thought all the samples were imperfect, but one mage couldn't destroy the entire squad, so he was definitely level 4. Then MC asked, "Who is this?" He answered, "His opus magnum, his child. The devourer, the embodiment of his philosophy. He feeds on flesh to evolve. This is the future of humanity." With these words, he pressed the button and shouted, "The ideal branch of humanity's development." But before he could finish, the protagonist launched his attack. He thought, damn it, a second was not enough. He found the button before it could cut off his wrist. Cannibalism, evolution, and the future. At that moment, the devourer emerged from the flask, and he thought he now understood what he had been trying to do. The professor, leaning against the table leg, clutched his wounded arm and, grinning, shouted, "Crazy mage, his mana has marinated the meat to the very bones, and his child will taste it." The next second, the devourer opened its mouth and said, "Eat." The protagonist was surprised. What? He thought it could talk? Then the monster shouted that it was hungry. Delicious. It looked delicious. He would eat it. The protagonist thought this creature could strengthen itself. Magicians spend years training and use powerful artifacts to perform such tricks. It won't stop. The next second, the devourer lunged at him. The protagonist created a barrier around himself and thought he had enough skills to carry out endless attacks only in his blind spots. With such skill, he was worthy of being called his opus magnum. For an adventurer, this is so exciting. But at that moment, the devourer leaped straight at him, but MC hit him in the face with his staff and sent him flying into the wall. He figured he was no match for him anyway. The protagonist has a habit. He lived in Bohemirna for 7 years as a research subject, so he had to constantly suppress his rage. Then, when he returned to his room after the experiments, he used his pent-up emotions as a driving force and completed the theory of opposing the heavens. Perhaps that's why the more he felt, the more anger he released. After that, his emotions stopped clouding his mind, and he began to think rationally. He thought, the professor's best work, then, is the devourer, as he himself called it. This creature's physical abilities are on par with the Orshish jesters from Pate, and it regenerates in much the same way, but the devourer's agility and speed are much greater. The next second, the monster flew at him again. The protagonist raised his staff in front of him and thought, that's it. Then he stood up and swung his staff, directing fire forward, but the devourer flew to the side and slammed face first into a stone that had risen from the ground. At that moment, MC had just used an earthen spear. He turned around and said it was a trap, idiot. After that, he used a magic arrow. He thought any knight, in principle, would have defeated him. The devourer doesn't recognize even the most basic feints. He just waves his fists, although he has no shortage of strength, that's true. A beast in humanoid form. At that moment, the monster's body was pierced by a stone spear, and the protagonist, smiling, said it was too weak to be called his greatest creation. The professor cried out in fear. How was this possible? He thought. How could he lose to his opus magnum? This creature absorbs the traits of its victims through absorption and thus continuously grows stronger. His creation, this man of the future, neo-human, and yet he fell so ingloriously in this battle. No, this child just woke up. He's still hungry and can't use his full power. If he had another chance, he'd feed him his severed arm to restore his strength, then kill the mage and run away. Then MC came closer to him and said, given the structure of the facility and the traces left behind, there must be records. Where are the experiment records? He replied. This, the protagonist asked. Did he say this was his child? If he didn't hand over the research, he'd kill him right here. The professor agreed, rising to his feet, and thought, this is a chance. Since he's also a mage, maybe he'll let him live after seeing the records. Then he took out a book and said he didn't mind him taking a look. That's the whole point of his brutal research. After that, the protagonist picked up the book, leafed through it, and threw it on the ground. He said he didn't think he'd need it. The professor looked at him in surprise and shouted, what is he even thinking? He replied that from a biological standpoint, this research was of the highest value, bearing any breach of ethical norms. It could rival even the magical tower of Bohemirn. The professor cried out in surprise. Then why? He replied, because he had different views. And the plan described at the end of these journals could cost humanity dearly. The professor shouted at him to wait. He was just going to kill him and the neo-human. The protagonist said that if he told him what the arc was, he might reconsider, although he should forget. He thought that Jason was already on his way here, so there was no time. If he wanted to avoid complications, he should finish everything here. After that, he told him to disappear. He concentrated energy around himself, and the professor asked him to wait. He had to give him a chance. He wasn't finished yet, but the protagonist still used flame, engulfing the professor and the neo-human in flames. Jason ran into the room and asked, "Sir Asher, is he alright?" He confirmed it. He too seemed unharmed. Did he deal with the killer? And they should be communicating informally. He smiled and said that he had dealt him a strong blow to the side. If a vice captain like him was in such a state, then someone else would probably have been hurt much worse. MC looked at the records and thought, judging by how much Jason had said, he simply left. Then he looked at his hand in surprise and asked, "Map?" He thought, judging by the terrain, it was near Mortis. What was that red mark? The next second, he grabbed his head sharply, crying out in pain. He thought, a sudden headache and loss of strength. As far as he knew, these were symptoms of mana depletion. Had he miscalculated and used too much? He would think about it later. For now, he needed to get back. Several days had passed since the professor's defeat, although peace seemed to have returned to Mortes after that incident. The mayor was furious after confirming the professor's plans for an underground passage. As a result, the city's knights were put on alert. They conducted a full sweep of the city and strengthened defenses. The commanders announced they would search for new passages and seal those they found, but that was no longer his problem. Now he was worried about the injection of mana circulation stimulants. Thanks to injections that affected the body's capabilities, he had reduced the years it took a mage to develop to just a few weeks. He thought it was time to move on to the next stage. He had reached the middle of the third rank in the Verdan elemental magic system. After some time, the man sitting in the chair, holding a glass, asked, "So, the professor is dead?" He had long since decided to deal with him himself. Now he wouldn't be annoying. So the mysterious Asher killed the professor? He would have to meet him in person. Sometime later, MC was training at the Martes Knights training grounds. He frowned and thought, the location marked under the professor's direction. Getting to the point, it was an old, now abandoned research center. Located in the forest on the border of Martes and hidden under a massive tree, there was an entrance that could only be accessed by unlocking a mechanical device. Inside, besides rats and insects, no significant life forms were found. The only things they found were the fang-shaped emblem mentioned in the professor's diary and the skin of Mabot, known for his high physical endurance. There was no information about a group called the Ark, or those involved in cultivating neo-humans. People looked at Asher and asked, is he a crazy mage? Why is a mage practicing spear techniques? Did his teacher hit him over the head with a stick or something? MC thought, nevertheless, he got his hands on the valuable skin of Mabot and managed to prevent a catastrophe in Martes. This is a good result. The guy approached him and said, Ash, the mayor is looking for him. After a while, the mayor sat in the room and said, Ashe, he owed him a huge debt. Asher replied, it's nothing. The mayor grabbed his head and said that, thanks to the extremist plan he had uncovered, they were able to catch the remnants of the group hiding in the city. But they didn't get any significant information because they were all just madmen paid and manipulated by that notorious scoundrel called the Professor. And Asher, he asks him to understand that he had to keep his contribution a secret, despite its significance. MC smiled and replied, no problem. Otherwise, the citizens would panic. Reputation is important. He needs to build his own if he wants to earn money and gain experience. Once he's recognized as the mage who saved the city, he'll probably get more opportunities, like in Paida's territory. The mayor inquired, so, are they going? However, the reason Asher agreed to keep the incident a secret was because Henry said this place is a storage facility for rare items. They were acquired directly by the city or by criminals. A storage facility for magical items. The mayor said MC can take anything. Whatever he likes is his. Asher thought because he'll receive a much more valuable reward for his efforts than just money. Henry said, from a skillfully crafted mithril sword that's easy to infuse with mana, to high-quality weapons and magical artifacts, they have it all. No need to rush. Let him choose what suits him. MC thought there were plenty of opportunities to earn fame, but the opportunity to obtain such rare magical artifacts is rare. He turned around and asked, can I appraise it? The mayor asked in surprise. He's a mage, but he's able to understand the value of an artifact? That's impressive. He can act. Asher approached the Staff of Escape, which increased spell speed, but only slightly. Earth magic reduced mana cost, but that was very insignificant. MC thought that, overall, most of these were good, but what he had now was better. The next artifact was a magic cloak. Its resistance to physical attacks was insignificant, as was its resistance to fire. A ring of restoration, minor wound regeneration, and very minor health regeneration. Asher thought, all useful, but nothing of personal value. Maybe he should just sell the mithril sword and buy something else? At that moment, another artifact caught his attention. MC asked what kind of ring it was. He thought about it. It didn't respond to evaluation, so it was probably not a magic item. Henry asked him to take his time. He had plenty of time. MC replied, yes, then he wouldn't rush. After a while, it was already dark outside, and the mayor warily apologized and suggested that MC decide. He turned around and apologized to him. Henry thought for a moment, thinking he'd just pick something out quickly, but he was examining everything very carefully. Asher showed him a necklace of protection, an automatic mana barrier, and said he'd take it. The mayor looked at it carefully and asked, "A necklace of protection? But wouldn't that require more mana than manually creating a barrier?" MC replied, "No problem at all." Henry thought in surprise, but letting him go with just that was a bit cruel of him. Then he'll also give him that ring he'd been looking at recently. He held out the ring and asked Asher to take it too. MC asked in surprise, "May I?" He said it was just one item. "Is he allowed to take both?" Henry happily replied, "He's the hero of Martes. One more trinket, it's nothing. So he'll be leaving town soon?" MC smiled and replied, "Not quite. He plans to stay for a while. He needs something very important." The mayor replied, "He understands. If there's anything he can do to help him, just let him say so." Asher thanked him. After some time, a guy was working in a mine in the Viron territory. He stopped and asked what it was. He screamed in fear when he saw a skull. A man approached him and asked why he was panicking. Had he never dug up bones before? The guy answered fearfully, "No, it's not that. There's just something weird here. A normal hit with a pickaxe should have broken it. It's like something's wrong with it. Why is it whole?" The man kicked the skull and asked, "There, does it feel better?" He told the guy to take his pickaxe and get back to work. They need to finish. The guy stood up and said fearfully, behind him. The man asked again, confused, What's wrong with him today?" He turned around and said there's nothing behind him. Suddenly, a skeleton covered in mana appeared behind him, and then several more. The man screamed in fear. "Undead?" He ordered the guys to get out of the mine. The skeletons attacked the miners, striking rapidly. A rumor began to spread that undead had appeared in a mine in Viron territory. With the appearance of creatures that could not be killed, a state of emergency was declared in Viron. Testimonies of survivors from the mine spread, and the entire territory was plunged into fear. Meanwhile, the tragic story of Viron began to spread by word of mouth, and a messenger from Viron also arrived in Martes. Myrna asked when the two became so close, and so the news reached Verdun. MC created a magic sphere and asked, "Is this an example of a proper magic spell?" Eris answered, "Yes. Now he needs to try moving quickly with it." It took a whole month to learn this. A month had passed since the professor's murder. All this time Asher had been learning magic from Eris. MC approached the orc and thought, increase strength, increase reaction speed, and enhance senses. A barrier spell. Asher created a huge barrier and used mana concentration. He had reached the level where he could use it in real combat. Eris said, "She can't believe it." She thought, "The mage defeated the orc with his bare hands. In just 13 minutes. What can't he do?" MC pulled his cloak towards himself and said, "The lessons definitely paid off." He thanked Eris. She started waving her hands and said, "No, he's amazing. He probably could have learned all this himself." Asher said, "There are no books left, and he's stagnating. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have been able to learn spell magic." Eris was slightly embarrassed and thought, usually someone might think he's very good if he can do everything himself. Despite such skills, he's modest and good-looking. Are there such wonderful people? He's simply perfect. He has all the advantages. Why is he not interested in romantic relationships at all? Eris asked him to wait and not tell her that he had such a problem. MC walked past her and replied, "No, he doesn't have that." Eris turned around and screamed, "Really? Wait, did he read her mind?" Asher replied, "It's written all over her face." Eris ran after him and said, "He misunderstood. This is a huge misunderstanding." A voice suddenly rang out, "Good afternoon, Mr. Asher." The MC asked in surprise, "The head of the Martes Adventurers Guild?" Oscar said he had a favor to ask. Oscar, the head of the adventurers, was leading an investigation when he was falsely accused. The reason a man like him was looking for him could be because hordes of undead have appeared in the mines near the Viron territory bordering Martes. Their numbers are so huge that help is needed. There are rumors that contact with the undead causes curses and illnesses. That's why no adventurer agreed. Then Oscar found out that he dealt with the professor and came to him. He didn't really want to get involved in this, but he was out of money and wanted to take this opportunity to improve his reputation. So he agreed. People were talking among themselves. "This guy, is he a mage? They say he's been training in close combat with a staff or a spear lately. He's not only good looking, but also in good shape, an atypical mage." MC turned around and said he'd heard some strange rumors. Did she know about them? Eris laughed and replied, "No, of course not." She thought, in fact, she already knew. Asher said in any case, he didn't expect her group to go too. "She's not afraid of the undead, Eris?" Eris replied, "No, of course not. Silly rumors about curses don't affect academy graduates like her. Besides, they'll be supporting in the back line, not the front lines. This is a great opportunity to gain achievements without actual combat." Myrna thought sheepishly. No need to say it like she's proud of it. In other words, it means they're not part of the battle group. Asher looked away and said, he hopes this really is a good opportunity, just like she said. One day had passed since the expedition departed. The carriage was moving along the street road, and adventurers were sitting inside. The guy looked away and said, he's been using flight non-stop since yesterday. Is his mana okay? He seems to be keeping his distance from them. The girl looked at Eris and asked, Iris, right? What's their relationship like? She thought they were quite close. Eris became embarrassed and asked, can you say they're like senior and junior comrades? Their group had gotten into trouble during the last mission. Then Asher suddenly appeared and saved them. After that, they became close. MC was hovering in the air in front of the carriage when suddenly he felt dark mana. The girl asked, so they both graduated from the same academy? Eris replied, not quite. Asher is more like a mentor, but the age difference between them is not that big. The girl replied that she didn't quite understand. Suddenly, MC climbed into the carriage and said, A horde of undead was spotted up ahead. It looks like they are pursuing the inhabitants of the Veyron territory. He will go ahead and help them. MC rushed forward and thought, they are still quite far from the collision zone, but there are a lot of them. This is the perfect chance. He dedicated an entire month to spell magic, and it's time to see the results. Among the treasures that Asher stole from the magic tower is a grimoire. Only mages of the 3rd level and above can use it, but simply opening this book enhances the magic power of the caster. This is a rare item that all mages desire. Only the master of the magic tower can create it. This requires expensive materials, so only a limited number of grimoires have been made. Most of them are already in use, making them ineffective. The one he brought back, however, is an unregistered grimoire of elemental magic. He engraved a complex, permanently linked magic circle called Link into it. And now this is his first real test after completing the link with this grimoire. Asher said, geographical manipulation. He extended his hand forward and thought, this is the perfect chance to test this one's power. MC created a huge stream of mana and directed it towards the monsters. Loud screams rang out, and the men scattered in fear. The man asked, what now? The undead bodies fell apart, and MC clenched his hand and created a huge hand that emerged from the ground. Asher used Air Road, Flame, and Dual Spell. He created a huge stream of mana and released it, causing an explosion. The undead bodies began to burn with bright flames. The adventurer looked at this and said, he's been using flight since yesterday, and he still has enough energy to use such spells? MC descended and thought, the spell he wrote down in the grimoire was an earth element spell. Perhaps it was the result of a combination of the enormous mana of his transformed body using sky superiority and the grimoire's enhanced geographical manipulation. It wasn't all in vain. Eris thought, he's already above level 4, right? These aren't the skills of a 3rd level mage. She turned around thoughtfully and saw a huge skeleton behind her, roaring loudly. A huge man appeared in front of her and cut the skeleton in half. The adventurers turned around and asked, what the hell? The giant screamed, where's all his loot? The guy's eyes widened in surprise and thought, a huge warrior in platinum armor and with an axe. It can't be. The giant asked, why is everyone so silent? He asked them where his prey was. The guy thought, the butcher Galliarch. Eris thought fearfully, why was this man here? She said in a shaking voice, if he meant the undead, they had all already fallen under the blows. Galliarch asked, what? There were dozens of them. He thought, when they were far from here, they received a report of a horde of undead. There should be quite a lot of them, but she says that they were all destroyed? Galliarch looked at MC and thought, did he do this? He approached Asher and asked, gray-haired, is this his job? MC frowned with displeasure and said, yes, so what? Galliarch spoke up, it's very impolite to answer like that. He came here because he was hired to hunt these undead. They were his prey, and he just stole his job. He interfered with him, so he better pay. Asher jumped back and asked, and pay full price? He wondered how much it was. Galliarch thought, he suddenly increased the distance. He probably chose a fighting position as befits a mage. Is he seriously considering engaging him in combat? Well, they'll have their fun, the guy said irritably. Idiot, no need to act thoughtlessly. He can't fight a butcher. Eris asked, wait, is this man dangerous? The guy replied, dangerous is an understatement. He's strong and has a fiery temper. A few years ago, he got drunk and started a brawl in a tavern. He crippled a knight, even though he was just trying to stop him. Eris screamed in fear. Drunken crippled a knight? That's a serious crime. And the guild didn't punish him at all? The mage replied, not at all. They need this warrior. The adventurers turned and looked at him in surprise. A mage from Galliarch's group, Goad, said, it would be unreasonable to expect normal rules to apply to someone like a butcher who has a platinum rank. The guild is well aware of this fact. A fighter from Galliarch's group, Narian, said, Goad, stop explaining. She asked him to try to stop the butcher. If their destination is Veyron, this could become a real problem in the future. Goad said, then they better not make the situation worse. He stepped forward and asked Galliarch to calm down. These people are probably just carrying out orders from Veyron. If he fights, it could lead to big problems in the future. He asked to let him finish, showing the difference in their skills. Galliarch sked in displeasure and said, they can just kill them all and say they were ambushed by the undead. Goad adjusted his glasses and said, there he is. He looks confident in his abilities. He asked to be shown to his place. MC looked around puzzled and thought, is this magical pressure? It looks like level 3 at best. The name sounds majestic, few would argue with that, but it's just a technique where he releases raw mana. He uses this in real combat, right? Then, suddenly Goad fell to his knees, and Galliarch thought, what the hell? He interrupted the magical pressure and knocked Goad out. Goad's a pretty good mage, so that means this guy is stronger than they thought. Galliarch called out to MC and asked, Mage, what's his name? MC tilted his head slightly and replied, Asher. The butcher smiled and said, see you in Veyron. The clash with Galliarch's group ended faster than expected. Team Martes, who was assigned to guard the surviving members of the royal family, was delayed on the way to Veyron. By coming into conflict with Galliarch, he earned the disfavor of part of the group. And the next day, Lord Veyron, Farnad van Veyron, shouted, thank you for answering their call. Now they'll head to the Veyron mines. Veyron's troops stood next to their horses, and members of the Order of Lewis gathered nearby. Farnad said, the goal is to destroy the suddenly appeared army of undead. Let there be no casualties. At this time, the Galliarch adventurer group was walking through the forest, and the order to advance was heard in the Martes group. Galliark and MC exchanged glances, and the butcher laughed and asked them not to tell him that he was nervous. The guy whispered to Asher not to fight him. MC replied that he would not if he did not start first. He ordered the guy to better concentrate. The battle had already begun. The knights struck with maces and shouted loudly. Someone said that if the undead have a physical form, then they need to aim for the head. If you hit them in the middle, they regenerate. Priests and mages should support from the back line. A huge creature appeared from underground, and the knight screamed, "It's a blood golem." He ordered them to retreat. If they don't retreat, they will be crushed. They won't be able to destroy it with ordinary swords. We need to retreat quickly. Galliark pushed off the ground and rushed towards the monster. He landed and asked, "That's a blood golem, right? This is perfect for a warm-up." He struck the monster, leaving a trail of fire behind him. He tore the creature's head off, and Farnad spoke in surprise, as you would expect from a butcher. He destroyed the golem with one blow. But what is he doing now? Galliark swung the creature's head and threw it towards the knights, who screamed, "What? What a psycho. Where is he throwing that?" MC looked at it and said, "How rude." Galliark beckoned with his finger and asked, "If he's not going to show his true power, then what is he even doing, Asher? Everything he showed yesterday was just a trick." Suddenly, the ground began to shake, which surprised the butcher. Asher used terrain manipulation, and then a fireball. A bright flame engulfed the entire area, and Eris asked in fear, "Ash, what is he doing?" Myrna said, "He instantly cast serious spells one after another." Galliark laughed loudly and then screamed, "He looks like a fool, but he has a backbone. He likes it." He challenged MC to see who is stronger. Asher asked discontentedly, "You missed him?" "Be sorry," he shouted. "The one who destroys the most enemies wins." Starting with Galliark's provocation, they seemed to be participating in a competition, scattering undead left and right. As a result, the main strike force reached the Viron mines with fewer casualties than expected. Since space in the mines was limited, they couldn't send the entire army there, so they selected only a few people. Galliark approached MC and said, "He fought well, although, of course, worse than him." Asher told him discontentedly, "They are not friends, by the way." Galliark said, "They fought side by side on the same battlefield." He ordered him not to be harmful. Gode frowned and asked what Galliark saw in that guy. He had never heard such words from him. He thought, Asher, then he managed to use mana pressure. But that guy, in the blink of an eye, completely subjugated him with his mana. It seems he is level 3, like him, but he is hiding something. He is a cunning idiot. After a while, the group was walking through the mine. Someone said the Viron garrison will be waiting at the entrance. Then good luck to them. MC looked at Narian and thought, in the vanguard is a ranger from Galliark's group. He thinks her name is Narian. She is worthy of the gold rank. She goes first and is the first to see the danger, and then she instantly destroys the undead with surprise attacks. But not only her, all the party members perform their duties effectively. This is the true strength of the party. But for some reason, Asher feels uncomfortable. A loud cry was heard. "Stop!" The knight thinks this is the end of the mine. MC looked around and thought he would like to scan the entire mine with a mana detector just in case. But if a lich is nearby, they will most likely be detected. The priest asks not to tremble with fear, but to believe in the blessings of the god of light, Luas. MC thought, if they attack the enemy first, they can protect everyone. Eris asked, "Asher, is something wrong?" MC turned and looked at her in surprise. Galliark smirked and said, he was clearly tense. Did he also hear the smell of death? He can't pinpoint it, but there are powerful undead nearby. Who would have thought that something other than him could pique his interest? Eris asked, "Powerful undead?" Asher frowned in displeasure and said, as annoying as it was, the butcher's intuition seemed to be correct. He asked Eris to stay close to him when the battle began. Eris asked puzzledly, "Even he said that? What's in there, anyway?" MC replied, he didn't know yet. A cry was heard from the mine. "There's light coming from the end of the mine. No need to rush jumping there." Asher turned to Rox and said it was getting noisy. "What's going on?" Rox turned and said, "Ash, they were checking for other tunnels and found light coming from the end of this passage." Asher frowned and asked, "What?" He thought, there shouldn't be any other exits from the mine besides the one they came from. "And where did the light come from in the dungeon?" The knight asked fearfully. "What is this place?" Galliark walked forward with the group, waving his hand. He looked ahead and said, "This looks like a tomb." Someone asked, "Wait, isn't that the crest of the Kingdom of Estria?" Verdun is currently hiding his identity. After all, he escaped from the magical tower of Boghemirn. This land, the Duchy of Reviante, declared independence from the Kingdom of Estria. It's very strange that the crest of Estria appeared here in Viron, which belongs to Reviante. Gode frowned and asked, "Why are there traces of Estria here in such a place? Or maybe everything around isn't what it seems." Gode was very angry and thought, this is information he didn't discover during his preliminary reconnaissance. The reason he's trusted in this group is because of his skills as a spy. Even Galliark admits it. He can't afford to make a fool of himself again. Galliark flexed his hands and asked, "If they just destroy this, will the threat disappear?" Gode rushed forward and shouted, "He'll do it." Galliark turned around and asked again. Gode adjusted his glasses and said, "There's no need to bother with such a simple undead creature. He'll deal with it himself." The priests were ordered to use purification. MC frowned and thought, if this is an undead knight, are they dealing with a death knight? If it hasn't awakened yet, they can weaken it with purification, and destroy it without taking too much damage. The skeleton began to stir, and used a stone strike. The creature's eyes flashed, and Asher frowned in irritation. The skeleton lunged toward Gode, which greatly surprised him. Galliark grabbed the creature by the arm, and it jumped back. Galliark asked, "What the hell?" It suddenly moved. Judging by the way it moved, it was obvious it wasn't an ordinary undead. Could it be that it was a death knight? The priest screamed, "No, it's a lament knight." MC asked, "A lament knight?" The priest replied, "Although he's weaker than a death knight as a single creature, a monster also has his strengths. For example, these knights can command the undead." Asher spoke up. Then their disaster plan is clear. They will destroy the Lament Knight. But before that, he will rearrange the landscape in this area to neutralize the enemy's advantage in numbers. He created an energy flow, and Eris looked around in fear and screamed, "The ground is shaking." "Asher, what is he doing?" Galliark frowned and asked, "Does he want to fight him himself?" MC suggested he think clearly. When they get down there, each of them will have enough enemies to fight. He's sure he'll have plenty to do. All the adventurers began to fight, and MC spoke up. Meanwhile, he will take on the Lament Knight. The skeleton rushed towards Asher, who took off and activated multi-fire arrows. He thought that the undead glory in the sacred and fire elements. Then he should strengthen this. Dual spell, fire wave of arrows. The skeleton looked at the creature in confusion and thought, here's his chance. He used a fire spear and struck the monster in the chest. The creature swung its huge sword and threw it towards MC. Asher thought, even after being hit by the fire spear, is it completely fine? And will it immediately counterattack? If he blocks poorly, his mana shield can collapse, and the recoil will knock him off his feet. And then he will be defenseless. He created a wave, a winter gust, and a dual spell, and then glacial breath. Asher frowned and said, if fire doesn't help, then he will crush the creature with just force. He created an earth spear, a triple throw, and mana concentration. Earth spear. The Knight of Lamentation said, we need to return it. It created a huge flow of mana, which surprised MC. He wondered, did it reflect? No. What's more important is that the creature's appearance changed. He grabbed his head and thought, damn it, why did his mana run out now? If this continues, it will destroy him. Suddenly, the ground began to shake under his feet and cracks appeared. Galliark ran up to the monster and struck the monster, saying that he will not let anyone take the main dish. After a while, skulls lay on the ground, one of which Narian stepped on. Rock said, a full group against 3 liches. If Narian weren't here with her gold rank, there would be no chance. Goad approached him and said, he makes it sound like she's the only one doing something here. That's a little insulting, does he know? Rock sighed and replied, of course not. He helped too. Eris looked around and said, in any case, she was wondering if everything was okay. Myrna pointed her finger up and said, now is not the time to worry about the others. They must think about how to escape. There is no normal way out. They can't reach the ceiling, and they don't have enough strength to break through the wall. If Asher falls, they will practically be buried alive. Suddenly, the ground started crumbling, and someone screamed, what the? Galliark struck the monster, and someone asked, Galliark? He swung his fist and hit the skeleton again. The creature hit its head and grabbed its sword. The monster swung its sword and jumped back. There were shouts, Asher, it's Asher, and Galliark. Galliark turned around and asked, what is he still able to move, little fighter? Why didn't he rest for a while? MC ordered him to slam shut and asked what he thought of the enemy. Galliark replied, it's strong, of course, but he likes this walking skeleton. He said he'd start, and MC needed to get ready to fire. Asher replied, he'd try. Galliark swung his axe and lunged at the monster, casting Obliterate. He kicked the creature, sending it flying. Monsters appeared around him, and Asher cast Mana Burst. Galliark grabbed the monster and slammed it against the wall. At that moment, MC ordered it to take a step back, which confused the butcher. He created a huge stream of mana and sent it towards the creatures. Galliark managed to run away and screamed, he's a crazy idiot! He turned around and saw a sword flying towards him. It hit him in the stomach, and he fell to the ground. MC continued to fight the monster, frowning in confusion. The pendant on his neck glowed, and the skeleton struck Asher. He remembered the conversation with the mayor. Henry asked, a necklace of protection? It's certainly nothing, but it will consume more mana than directly using a magical barrier. Is he sure it suits him? MC replied, absolutely. Asher wiped his face and thought. He had been worried about running out of mana before, but fortunately, there were no consequences. Nevertheless, his mana reserves were almost depleted, and his left shoulder was dislocated from the last blow. However, the biggest problem was that just before he could defeat the creature, the monster's body was bound by black armor. After this appeared, it became much stronger. The priests grabbed the skeletal body with threads and shouted, boys, they're here. Someone asked, what kind of black armor is this? For the Weeping Knight to be like this, there is no record of such a thing in any of the church's archives. Galliark asked the clerics to hold on tight. The priests began to be drawn to the monster and asked, what? Galliark asked, what? He told them to hold on. Or do they all want to die in mass? He ordered them to pull themselves together and prepare to hold off the creature again. Goad frowned and thought, here's his chance. His attention is focused on the enemy. With his spell, he will defeat the Weeping Knight. This time, he will definitely succeed. Goad used an earth spear and aimed it towards the monster, when suddenly a shard flew into his neck. Galliark and Asher turned around and looked at this in surprise. Galliark ordered the priests to heal him faster. The lamenting knight swung his huge hands, spreading bright mana. Galliark jumped down in front of MC and asked, Asher, how long should he wait? MC asked, puzzled. What did he say? The butcher asked, he's going to use a powerful spell, right? He asked how much longer he needs to restore his mana. MC replied, a few seconds. Galliark clenched his fist and ordered them to get ready. Asher approached the skeleton and the butcher shouted, "He will shatter the armor where it was pierced earlier." He ordered his magic to be launched at him. Suddenly, the monster struck him again, piercing his ribcage. The butcher clenched his jaws and said, "The corpse must not move." He slammed the monster into the ground with all his might, causing a crack to appear. MC thought, it worked. The monster struck Galliark in the stomach and extended its clawed hand. MC said, he is the creature's opponent. He thought, the hole in the monster's chest has not yet closed. If he concentrates magic in this place, he can destroy the skeleton. Suddenly, a huge stream of mana flashed in front of him, and Asher turned and looked towards it. He thought, Eris? He remembered their conversation when he said that he thought she had more talent for ice magic. Eris asked again, ice? She will try not to embarrass him. MC thought, but she is not yet accustomed to elemental magic. She is good, Eris, thanks to her. Asher used flame and decided that they will win. He will return to him. No matter how many battles await him, he will return to his homeland. So he thought. But then he learned something he should not have known. Because of this, all plans collapsed, but he still has to return Lorien. Suddenly, MC opened his eyes and looked in surprise at the people standing in front of him. The priest asked, is he awake? Eris asked, the elder, is he okay? Asher asked, are they finished? The priest answered, yes, thanks to him. Eris said, they defeated the knight, but he suddenly lost consciousness. The priest said, it's probably because of the medallion he was holding. He feels the same spirit in it as in the knight. MC remembered the image of a little boy and looked down. The priest reached out for the pendant and said, he was holding it tightly, so he won't be able to take it. Considering the aura, he should have given this thing to him. MC answered, no, he will take care of it himself. The priest frowned in displeasure and said, but anything can happen. Asher answered, everything is fine. There shouldn't be any problems. Suddenly the butcher screamed, and the loot is modest. The priest said, it's true. Asher asked, but what's more important is what happened to him. The priest asked again, is he worried about Goad? Fortunately, emergency measures were taken in time, and he survived. MC stood up and said, okay then. He suggested returning since the cleanup was complete. The undead, commanding the undead, the defeated crying knight who appeared in the Viron mines. The Lord was horrified when he learned of this, and hastily gave the order to clean up. Fortunately, no one who entered the mines died. Looking into the deceased's memories, Asher felt some uneasiness. This incident clearly showed him one thing. What exactly? That he had become stronger. MC sat on the tower and said, perhaps real battles really do accelerate growth. While he is at level 3 with the magic book that severed the connection and increased mana, he can use area of effect spells corresponding to level 4. Although this is not enough to achieve this. But if he does not give up, Asher will definitely achieve his goal. After all, he will be able to increase his mana. So, it is done. The priests from the Lewis Order decided to stay and continue to watch over the mines, and the adventurers headed back to their districts. After a while, the butcher asked, Ash, is he leaving? MC didn't answer. Galliark smiled and said, it looks like he's not going to become an adventurer or a mercenary. Is he going to Grey too? MC asked again. Where? The butcher asked. What? He doesn't even know where Grey is? Then how is he going to make money? Did he think people would just come to him once he became famous? MC asked, why not? The butcher replied, he's so naive. Basically, it's like being a shady information broker. Grey buys and sells information to those whose skills have been proven. They are also the hub that organizes requests. Asher asked again, requests? Galliark said, there are more people like him than he thinks. People who don't follow the rules but want money and fame. MC asked, why is he telling him this? The butcher looked at him thoughtfully and said, well, they had been through the flames of battle together and had become comrades in arms. Asher asked why he had decided that. He wondered, trapped in the magic tower, and hadn't known about this information. If there were orders with risks, there would likely be many chances to encounter strong opponents. This meant there were many opportunities to become stronger. The carriage was parked on the main street, where Eris looked out and cried out, they're leaving soon. Senior, isn't he with them? She thought. When she returned to Martez, she should learn more about elemental magic. She looked at MC and asked, what's he standing there for? He's not going to leave them, is he? Besides, his wounds were bad. Asher smiled and thanked her for the magic she had given him. With such training, he'll be good at controlling elemental magic. But he really had to go. Tears welled up in Eris's eyes, and she thought, it all happened so suddenly. She had survived and learned the theory and elemental magic she couldn't learn at the academy. She understood that they met suddenly and would part just as suddenly, but she didn't expect it to happen so soon. But she can't ask him to stay by her side. MC took her hand and said, so, they'll see each other, Junior, and the next time they meet, she will strive to be the junior he can be proud of. Eris said, yes, see you. At this moment, Ravelin ordered a man to answer her. Why is the Dark Hour targeting the Bohemian Magic Tower? The Dark Hour is a group of people who have deviated from the path of orthodox magic. It attacked their third secret laboratory, but it still hasn't learned anything about who is behind the attack on the Bohemian Magic Tower and what. Perhaps because low-level mages aren't privy to such subtleties. Verdun, the guy said, that's impressive, Ravelin. Just think, a simple second-tier spell has such destructive power. Waldeck's third apprentice, Lucard Maniacs, smiled and asked, as expected, people with special abilities are different from everyone else, right? Ravelin flew past him and asked, she said she'd handle this herself, right? Lucard folded his arms and asked how he could allow her to do this. The person who could become his master's fourth apprentice Could he expose her to such danger and let her go alone? Ravelin turned and said, perhaps he should be more concerned with his thesis. It's been 7 years since the publication of the multi-continuity theory, right? Many are eagerly awaiting it. But can his talent resonate as much as it did 7 years ago? Lucard asked again. His talent? She doesn't believe those baseless rumors from the past, does she? Did the Tower Master himself acknowledge this thesis, or was she simply jealous? Ravelin turned around and asked, jealousy? No, she simply found it strange that a man with such an impeccable mind could do so. In 7 years, he had only managed to rise to the 4th rank. She left. Lucard frowned in irritation and thought, how dare she? This girl had always been unbearable. And now she was dredging up the past and even making claims against him? Verdun was dead, so no one could ever reveal that he had stolen this thesis. But nevertheless, Ravelin was growing bolder every day. Lucard frowned and said, dealing with someone of the 3rd rank is not difficult, but if he acted under the influence of emotion, he risked losing the Tower Master's favor. No, he would simply maintain his reputation and gradually rise to the 5th rank. When he reached that, the world would be his. Then it wouldn't be too late to get rid of her. After all, time was on his side. Before leaving Viron, Asher stopped in the village of Grey on Galliarch's recommendation and eventually arrived in Kohen. Known for its industry and manufacturing, this city attracts many who seek stable work and value public order. But due to living conditions, there is also a wide gap between rich and poor. The Kohen slums are known throughout the duchy as some of the most terrible, and it is in these slums that MC must search. He walked down the street and looked around, thinking that the difference with the main area was striking. Even the Martes slums weren't so bad, but at least the smell wasn't unbearable here. MC saw a building in front of him and thought, somewhere here he can buy information. Kohen, the tip of poverty. Asher entered the building and heard a voice. They are closed now. Please let him go. MC spoke. The butcher recommended it to him. The man asked, his name? MC replied, Asher. The man pointed his thumb to the side and said, he looks just as he was described. Since he came on the butcher's recommendation, he will skip the formalities. He needs to go through this passage. It will take him underground, but he asked to let him warn him not to cause any trouble, unless he wants them both to be very busy. MC went towards the passage and went down the stairs. He looked around and thought, a warehouse? The man in bandages slightly opened the curtain and said, please come this way, Asher. MC turned and thought, a tavern? He went inside and thought, so there was a hidden space behind the tent. 2 magicians, an archer, no, one he can't identify, and 2 swordsmen. It seems they are all here to find work or learn something useful for themselves. The man spoke. He should accompany him only so far. After that, please let him wait at the table in front. MC entered the room, and a voice was heard behind him. It is nice to meet you, Asher. He's Pale, an information broker in the southern regions. He asked Asher to please sit down. His achievements since arriving in Pite territory in such a short time are impressive. MC asked again, were they keeping an eye on him? Pale looked at the papers and replied, information is power. He knows that. So, what does he need? A job or information? MC answered both. Pale said thoughtfully, he can arrange a commission for him. Yes, but both commissions and information are divided by level. MC asked again, by level? Strange. The documents had disappeared and not by magic. Pale said, the value and dissemination of information always comes with responsibility. As a merchant, he risks his life. Therefore, naturally, they evaluate trust, dignity, and abilities. That is, there are no exceptions to the evaluation system. Asher thought for a moment. Information about the treasures from the magic tower is not yet available to him. But he needs money. Maybe he should take the commission, level up, and gain access to it. He asked if he could choose his own order. Pale handed over the contract and replied, yes, they would give him several to choose from. But first, he needed to fill out a form. It was just a formality. MC signed the contract with magic, and Pale said, it seems Asher is more inclined to research than just swinging a sword. If so, there's one task that would suit him perfectly. It's not much different from his past journeys where he hunted dangerous creatures. MC asked, demi-human subjugation? Pale replied, there are such orders too, but not this time. MC opened the envelope, and Pale said, this time, the target is a howling wolf.